The story begins with Chin-yu sleeping on a bed covered by a blue blanket, with only his legs exposed. He slept sweetly with his head on his pillow and pulled his blanket up to his chin. Soon he felt that he should have somehow slept tightly on that bed, and little horns appeared between the hairs on his head. Chin-yu half thought that his 130-centimeter legs were very poor, and added that for sure since he couldn't align them in bed. The sun was shining outside, its rays falling through the window into the room. And still dozing, I thought I'd been through it all. He continued that he ended up, but before he could finish thinking about it, someone called out to him and he woke up. And then he finished the thought with words in this world of writers. They started shouting at him whether he had seen the time and why he was still in bed. In front of him stood Yu Lee, a third-grade high school student and a second-ranked martial artist. She angrily asked about whether he needed his aunt's personal invitation. Chin-yu gazed at her bust and thought, now that's a real horse. Yu Lee became very angry at him and angrily shouted his name very loudly. A fight broke out in the room. You could hear yelling about someone thinking she was the devil's child, that she had gone in to consider why those flowers were so red, that someone was being screamed at to die. At this time, a beautiful young woman was wielding a knife in the kitchen, chopping vegetables quickly. It was Yuna, her 34 years old, a former wild horse of the emperor, a knight of the Centurion Order, a fourth-ranked fighter. She was enjoying a perfect day. While waiting for the food to cool down, Yuna turned to Yu Lee, asking her to be more affectionate. While having breakfast, Yuna reminded her daughter that Chin-yu was her brother after all. But she sharply told her that he was not her brother. Chin-yu joined them for breakfast, and at that moment, Yu Lee said that he was their enemy. Yuna asked her not to say that again. Yuna said that as soon as Yu Lee eats, she can go to her extra classes. She agreed with her mom. Chin-yu, while eating breakfast, thought about the fact that Yu Lee was right. According to the memories of the first owner, he is not only their enemy, but he was also the murderer of Yuna's husband. Chin-yu recalled that 11 years ago, the Devil's Gate had opened. Through it, all the demons came out. The whole empire united to drive out the demons. Everyone armed themselves and went into battle against the devils. But though the devil retreated in the end, he left behind descendants. Chin-yu said as he ate. He is 16 years old, a son of a devil, a first-rank warrior. He stood up from the table he had just been eating at and abruptly twisted his head around. With his horn, he caught the glass on purpose and it naturally shattered. Yu Lee angrily shouted that the empire shouldn't have welcomed them with open arms. He only glanced at her. Yu Lee couldn't calm down and continued that everyone should die. Yuna tried to comfort her, and Chin-yu silently left the room. The sun was shining brightly outside the house, and the leaves on the trees were rustling quietly. It was warm, and Chin-yu sat at home, alone in his room, and pondered over what was said to him. He understood that Yu Lee's aggression was revenge for killing his father, but he couldn't understand why she called him a bastard. He spent the whole of the next time he was in the room thinking about all of this. And he came to the following conclusion, that whatever hatred people had for him, no one tried to deal with him directly. That's what he thought as he lay in bed. He closed his eyes with his hands and asked himself what he should do next. It was this time that interested him. Chin-yu thought that maybe some system should awaken. He was still lying on the bed with his hands covering his eyes. His palms still covered his eyes and part of his face the same way, but something was happening to his horn at that moment. He opened his eyes. They were red. He tried to figure out what was going on. This was the activation of the system. This really surprised Chin-yu and he could barely recover. An imaginary scoreboard appeared in front of him, informing him that the host could improve his skills using his opponent's energy. There were no opponents at the moment. After reading the information, he said it was awesome and asked the coach if that was his ability. As he left the room, he smiled wryly, wondering to himself, so why was he doing housekeeping? The cause of death in his past life was a fight that led to hypoxia. Chin-yu looked around in the room, surprised that no one was home. Only one Aunt Yuna, who was in the kitchen, was left. He was glad that only Aunt Yuna was there, because if Yu Lee was at home, she would definitely beat him up. Auntie would just be reprimanded. He would sneak up on his auntie unnoticed to try to scare her and try out the system at the same time. Chin-yu raised both his hands up, made some furious sounds so that Aunt Yuna swung the knife she was wielding in the kitchen. In the next second, that big knife of Aunt Yu-ning was under the chin on Chin-yu's neck, and he looked at her with fright. She addressed him by name and asked him again what he was doing there at that moment. Auntie Yuna smiled at him and told him that his help was not needed there. Therefore, he should go and have a good rest. He saw the messages of extreme hatred for the host again. Energy 103. Further, the energy was climbing higher. So this was what the system was all about, he thought. Now he realized that Aunt Yu hated him so much. She was ready to stab him to death so that the knife was covered in blood. He looked at his auntie Yu-nu and was covered in fine cold sweat at that moment. She stood, holding a large knife in her hand, facing him. His energy was slowly running out. Cold sweat was pouring off him. He was very angry and trying to pull himself together. Next, Chin-Yu quickly ran to his room as far away from Aunt Yuno as possible. He stood outside the door and realized the fact that she was insane and completely out of it. It was such a high energy reading. Could it be because of him? The devil wanted to figure out who she was. Maybe a two-faced person, a madwoman, or a wolf in sheep's clothing. It wasn't that important, though. Who he was. Once again, he saw the scoreboard. Name Chin-Yu. Physical strength, 12. Mental strength, 5. Accumulated energy, 1,315. And according to Yu Li, was an average punching bag. Was pleased that he had gotten so much. He wanted to add his physical strength points. 3 additions later, the system was booting up. He was upset because he had miscalculated. Going from level 22 to level 23 cost 1,000 points, and the cost of improvement increased with each level. Now he wondered where he could get so much energy, and he thought he should show up in front of his aunt more often. In a cold sweat, he thought it was a good idea if he decided to die. He felt scared. Chin-Yu was still in his room under the stairs, and realized that he had nothing else to do but retreat. Yu Li was in her room and undressed, sitting on the bed, taking off her stockings. Suddenly, Chin-Yu entered the room and called Yu Li by name, saying that he had come to talk to her. Yu Li was startled by the sudden intrusion and barely had time to cover herself with her clothes. He was greatly embarrassed and turned purple when he saw the half-naked Yu Li in front of him. Then he smiled cheerfully and said she had nothing to hide from him at the moment. For in fact, he had everything she had as well. Now a blush appeared on her face. She continued to cover her breasts with her clothes. Yu Li quickly turned away and pulled up her shirt, and he went on about how his pecs weren't like hers, and showed his muscles. Chin-Yu looked at the half-naked girl who was quickly trying to get dressed. After that, the already clothed Yu Li abruptly and very forcefully struck Chin-Yu with the words for him to die. She beat him and beat him with all her fierce anger. He used her anger and consumed it. When she stopped hitting him, he lightly touched his busted lip. Blood was pouring from it. He began to tease her that it was too little. Maybe she hadn't eaten enough porridge. But in fact, he was pleased with himself, because it was not for nothing that he was waiting at the door for her to change. Yu Li shouted in rage that he was finished because he was laughing at her, and his used anger indicators were only increasing. She was beating him as hard as she could, and at that point kicked him in the face. She asked him if he was ready to die. Chin-Yu was lying on the floor, bleeding, and Yu Li was screaming, finishing him off that this would help him so much. He noticed that 500 units of accumulated anger had been consumed. Lying battered on the floor, he was pleased, thinking that was power. The door to the room in front of his face opened slightly. He was still lying there with blood on his face. Auntie Yuna called him by name. Chin-Yu, covered in cold sweat, raised his tired and lined eyes at her. And the aunt said it was getting late. What on earth was he doing in her daughter's room? The index indicated extreme hatred for the host. Energy that 14. All he had time to notice was a message of extreme hatred for the host. Energy 444, while his aunt stared in the doorway at him in her daughter's bedroom. Chin-Yu gathered his strength, raised himself up and said that he would probably still go to his room. As he left, he took one more look at the half-dressed Yu Li and said goodnight to her and her aunt. He thought to himself that he should get out of there as soon as possible. Yu Li stayed in the room with her mother and asked her if Chin-Yu wanted to joke on her like that. Farther away, a frightening shadow could be seen. Then a hand with a large and sharp knife appeared. The little angry boy, holding a knife in one hand, was stabbing himself in the stomach with it. Chin-Yu decided that this was the easiest thing to do. Taking out a knife, he stabbed several blows to his abdomen. With this, the stats became higher. Physical strength 24, mental strength 15, and war level 11. The next day, Chin-Yu came to school following Yu Li and thought that the little bird woke up early in the morning, and here she was with a backpack behind her back walking. His inner demon came to life in the middle of the school and ran in search of power. He stopped in the middle of the corridor, thinking that this was great, because this was the epicenter of the energy. People were walking past him. Chin-Yun hoped that his cultivated loyal companions would not suppress their feelings, and gathering the crowd, he began to tell them to look this way. Raising his middle fingers up for those around him, he noticed their anger and noticed that this was not a school, but an actual energy field. Yu Li couldn't understand what was wrong with him. After all, he didn't like going to school before, but here he was going with interest. Chin-Yu met his comrade in the corridor of the school and started talking to him about something. But he glared at the girl across from him, who was standing with her back to him. A friend had called him. A girl in a miniskirt noticed him and asked him about finally coming to school. It was Zhao Yujan, his class teacher, a middle school goddess teacher. She asked how he was feeling, as she had heard that he was a little sick. He only opened his mouth to say something back to her, but mumbled only, "I don't." Saw the energy readings. Hostility, energy increased by 55. Thought maybe she was faking it. He looked around carefully and saw the offended boys. Now he realized that it was a matter of male jealousy, and then he thought of doing something interesting just for himself, to test the level of energy he received. Chin-Yu suddenly accelerated and his face hit the class teacher's chest precisely. He said, lying on her chest, that he was still not really well. She said excitedly that she would take him to the infirmary. Chin-Yu mumbled that he didn't want to, without taking his eyes off her. She, on the other hand, was curious as to why he didn't want to go. All around, the other boys were barely restraining themselves from getting angry. Next, he whispered in her ear that the thing was that he was withering away from love. She angrily said, "You." His screen showed increased hostility. Energy increased by 55. His little demon was pleased at the anger of those around him. After all, it had worked for him. All around, the devils were very upset and angry as they were provoked by Chin-Yu. Toward the end of the school day, the school finally heard the cherished phrase that classes were over. Chin-Yu sat on the bench waiting for the rogue Yu Li. As it turned out, the school wasn't too bad, as he had gathered a lot of energy today. Suddenly he heard shouts of brothers, "Grab him." The other disciples ran out from behind the bushes, armed with bats, and attacked Chin-Yu. The guys running up to Chin-Yu sitting on the bench were dragging some kind of sack with them. Chin-Yu quickly threw a small brown bag over his head. The one shouted who turned off the lights for him. It was heard that he was being held, and he thought that the shaving pairs had come to him by themselves. In the bushes behind the bench, someone was watching the fight, as Chin-Yu was being beaten up by the other disciples. With a bag over his head, he began to fight back, scattering his attackers around. He hit one of the attackers with his head. Watching it all from the side was Chin-Yu's sister, whose name was Yu Li. She saw Chin-Yu being beaten from afar. He was wearing a big sack on his head. Yu Li started to get angry and shouted that except for her, and ran to them to help him in any way. That's when Yu Li finally finished her sentence by shouting that no one could hit him. She ran up to the guys who were beating up Chin-Yu. He couldn't understand what it was at first. Then he heard her voice and recognized her. Chin-Yu thought that she had decided to help him after all. But among the young men, she was clearly the weaker one. She was thrown aside with her face on the ground. He also, encouraged by Yu Li's support, punched one of the attackers with his fist. Then he kicked the other one and managed to deal with anyone who wanted to beat him up. After that, Chin-Yu removed the bag from his head and looked at the result of his work. The attackers were lying on the ground with blood on their faces. A little further away, he saw Yu Li, who was trying to move away from the blow and get up. He thought that it was really her. She's beating him, but she doesn't let others do it. He thought fearfully about making sure his aunt didn't find out what had happened. She would kill him. Chin-Yu walked up to Bi Li and saw that she was very swollen. He asked her who had beaten her so badly, and he would take revenge on her. Just then, he heard Yu Li make at least some sound and exhaled in relief. He noticed that the energy from the hostility only replenished by 5. She didn't seem to hate him as much as he thought she did. After all, not only had she saved him, but there was less hate coming from her than from her classmates. Chin-Yu sighed heavily as he looked at the battered Yu Li. She was feeling very bad at that moment. The guy loaded Yu Li on his back and slowly walked home with the valuable burden. Thought she was a strange girl. In the days that followed, his life became much calmer. At lunch, Yuna saw Yu Li's abrasions, but she said that she was a little distracted in training. This answer surprised Chin-Yu. He almost choked. He also worked hard at school to get extra energy points. He provoked the class teacher, made other students angry. He did his best to stir up hatred among the other guys, framing the girls by asking if she was the one this morning. Even provoked the director by saying that his hair loss ointment was delivered, and he kindly took it away. No need to thank him. Running away from the angry crowd, he smiled. What could be better than an evening jog? After all, he was full of energy. He was replenishing his energy from the hostility of others. One day, the North County High School League was held at his school, and the high school competitors were competing. He came to class, but he didn't see anyone, and couldn't understand why there was no class. Suddenly, Chin-Yu heard some strange sounds coming from the school. He wondered what the other students were doing in the empty school. There was no one around. Onward he went, smiling slightly, for he believed they were all at his disposal now. Chin-Yu went towards the sounds coming from the room. He was curious as to what was going on there. The angry crowd shouted, supporting Yu Li. Go ahead, make him now, Bai Xiao is doomed. Chin-Yu tried to understand why they were only supporting Yu Li. Suddenly the girl cried out and fell down, struck down by Bai Xiao. He didn't see exactly who had fallen, and thought he should see who the unfortunate person was. And then he realized that it was Yu Li who had fallen and not someone else. He rushed over to the girl. A girl in a military outfit and with a sword on her back fell to the floor. Chin-Yu lifted the girl in his arms and shouted her name. She only sighed in response. Bai Xiao stood joyful in the middle of the ring, victorious, and shouted the devil out when he saw Chin-Yu. Yu Li's rival began to mock her, saying that she was weak, and she was the daughter of a centurion knight. He then approached the teacher to declare him henceforth as the third-class representative of the high school. Chin Yu couldn't calm down, for he wanted to know what had happened, and how strong woman Yu Li had gotten such a serious injury from a peer. In the morning, a voice was heard in the house addressing my mom and saying they were leaving. Chin Yu looked around at how the girl was dressed and questioned if today was a special day. He looked at her clothes and added something that apparently she wanted to raise a fuss at school. The girl answered him sharply to keep his nose out of her business, for he seemed to be the only one in the whole school who didn't know anything. It hurt him what she was talking about. She said to forget it, and that she would join the knights soon. The boy wondered if the aunt had set an age limit, or why she had suddenly given her consent. The school was in the middle of the final round of choosing a class representative. The class teacher told them not to forget that friendship comes first, and competition comes second. And the tournament among North County High School students began at the school at this time. In the final duel for the title of representative of her class, the heiress to the head knight, a sophomore at the high school. Her opponent is the heir of White Dog Company, a second-grade student of Bai Xiao Middle School. The class teacher wished them good luck. Yu Li swung her sword and shouted beware with anger. She was very angry with him. Her sword Bai Xiao quickly intercepted with his shield to prevent it from hitting his body. Yu Li skillfully wielded her sword, forcing Bai Xiao to retreat and defend himself. He hissed the word devil. Next, he leveled off and began to gather his strength for the next strike. Standing straight at full height and raising his spear, he shouted out magic armor. A second later, Yu Li was making an attack on Bai Xiao, but he was already protected by the magic armor. She gathered herself to strike again, drew back her sword arm to swing. Bai Xiao at this moment realized that this was the perfect opportunity to attack his opponent. She was still taking a swing with her hand, clenching her teeth hard to make the blow harder. Bai Xiao asked Yu Li if she wanted to surpass the future knight in his speed. She wielded her sword skillfully, making some combination she knew to strike. Lifting her foot, Yu Li said that he hoped in vain that she would lose in this battle. Bai Xiao, with his side vision, saw the raised leg and said that one was cheating, and she gave him a mounted knight's crowning blow that not everyone could do. Bai Xiao fell to the ground with a loud noise and a pile of dust, struck down by Yu Li. The rays brightly illuminated the ring, where Yu Li, the class teacher, and Bai Xiao, who had been struck down by a girl, were. At this moment, Bai Xiao was greatly startled, lying on the floor. Yu Li placed her sword in front of his face and said that the winner had been decided. That's right, Bai Xiao. The class teacher started talking about what she was announcing. At this time, Yu Li was slinging her sword behind her back. The class teacher continued her winning phrase and took Yu Li's hand. And behind them, Bai Xiao started to get up from the floor. Yu Li only managed to hear the edge of her ear a haughty chuckle ha from Bai Xiao, who was behind her. And the next moment he had already stabbed her in the back with his sword. She fell to the front of the ring, wounded. Bai Xiao happily and gloatingly shouted to everyone that he had just won. The door to the room was ajar, through which a strip of light fell on the stairs. A white cat was sitting on the stairs. In the room, Yuna and the class teacher were talking, saying that she wanted to take Bai Xiao out of the fight, but the competition would take place the day after tomorrow. She went on to say that she was not allowed to do that, and the only thing she could do was to transfer Yu Li to another school of her choice. She's very sorry, but got the answer that Yu Li should win this fight. They began to argue amongst themselves, calling each other by their names Teacher Zhao, and in response, Centurion. Yuna lit a cigarette and said that this glorious title was forbidden to be uttered 10 years ago, and she went back to talking about her daughter. Yuna believed that Teacher Zhao had done her best to help Yu Li. Teacher Zhao couldn't understand what she was talking about. It was all the school's fault. 10 years ago, if it wasn't for Yu Ning's regiment fighting on the battlefield, would they have been able to count on peaceful skies? She went on to say that those times are long gone, but this child remembers everything. She promised that if the girl took the position of class representative, she would do everything she could to make that girl part of the order. But Yu Li was now sitting with a broken leg and grieving, and Yuna continued to Teacher Zhao that her daughter had lost. Yuna thanked Teacher Zhao for telling her everything. It was already quite late and she should go home. She said, "Okay, Centurion." Teacher Zhao left the room and was already walking towards the exit of the house. Suddenly, someone called her by name. It was Chin Yu, who told her that he would escort her to the exit. She was a little surprised at the offer, but she agreed. Walking down the stairs, she thanked Chin Yu for seeing her off. The white cat ran away from under her feet. Chin Yu asked Teacher Zhao if Bai Xiao would now be the representative of the seniors. Teacher Zhao looked at him upset and said that if no one defeated him before tomorrow noon, he would become the representative. She asked why he was asking, to which she heard that it was just because he was worried about his comrades. He remembered how Yu Li had been struck with the sword, but mouthed that he hoped it would help their classes unite. Teacher Zhao had no way of knowing what it was that Chin Yu was talking about at this moment. The next day in the second grade of school, Bai Xiao laughed loudly and thought that everyone could stare at him all they wanted. After the competition takes place, the top universities will want to get their hands on him. Bai Xiao dreamed, drooling with happiness, that the day would come and he would be at the very top and have everything he wished for. He doesn't care about his classmates, after all, they were never his competitors. Suddenly, the door to the classroom opened abruptly from a fist strike. Qin Yu immediately began to receive an energy charge from the hostility of the people around him. He started to speak. "Let me ask you something." Qin Yu, smiling, continued that our air is in place. Hearing this, Bai Xiao sat frightened at his desk. He pounded his fists on the table with anger, shouting what a damn loser. Meanwhile, Qin Yu's energy from hostility increased by 120. He calmly replied that he could call him whatever he wanted. Everyone looked at Qin Yu, but he only replenished his energy reserves. All around, no one could figure out what this pepper was. Qin Yu smilingly narrated that he had come to challenge him to accept. Bai Xiao was surprised. Him, a level 1 and 1, a level 2 and 7 warrior. He looked at his opponent with mockery, but with a snide smile on his face, he said it was a deal. Qin Yu abruptly grabbed the one by his hair. He pulled Bai Xiao by his hair towards the tabletop so sharply that he bumped. And Qin Yu noticed that this was a formal agreement, meaning Bai Xiao should bow to him politely. And walking away from him, Qin Yu added that that one was a good dog, so obedient. Immediately, his energy was replenished with hostility once again. There were many disciples gathered at the training ground. Teacher Zhao asked what was wrong with Qin Yu. How could he with level 1 and 1 challenge a disciple with level 2 and 7? After all, he might die. She was told that those had already entered the ring. She's upset because once the fighters are in the ring, she has no right to stop them, and she can only help when the situation is dire. There were two men standing in the ring. They regarded each other with anger. Bai Xiao started to say that it would be too late to fall on his knees later and beg his dad to help. Bai Xiao continued to throw insulting phrases at his opponent. He said that he didn't even have a combat uniform because he couldn't afford it, and that he was a beggar. He pointed his finger at Qin Yu. Qin Yu replied that the latter was too talkative and not worthy of being treated respectfully with all the rules of decency. After saying that, the energy from the hostility rose several times. Bai Xiao laughed, saying that one with their tongue and pointed his spear towards Qin Yu's side. Bai Xiao continued to threaten Qin Yu must remember that from the moment he hits him, he held his spear in front of Qin Yu and continued that the latter would be a corpse at the end of the battle. Bai Xiao pondered, smirking before fighting. He had both attacking and defense skills. He had stood up to even Yu Li, and this sucker would do it in no time. Qin Yu started attacking, and the first thing he did was break his opponent's spear. Bai Xiao was astonished and didn't understand what had happened. Next, he delivered a fist strike to the chest of the frightened Bai Xiao. Qin Yu struck again, but it was to the jaw and one of his teeth embedded into his arm. The crowd around was shocked. They didn't think that Qin Yu was so strong. Teacher Zhao thought with horror that this wasn't the end. Qin Yu struck his opponent hard with his fist and said to that next life was more human. He finished the phrase and punched Bai Xiao with all his might many times, striking with his fist. Teacher Zhao watched Qin Yu beating up his opponent. She was worried about the latter. After another series of blows, she whispered enough. She pulled up beside the ring and shouted that Qin Yu had won so he would stop. But he continued to punch and kick his opponent, until Teacher Zhao started shouting for him to stop after all, or his aunt and sister would be court-martialed. She came up to the ring and put her hand on his shoulder, and then she said she'd handle it. Qin Yu roughly grabbed the teacher's arm and twisted it, removing it from her shoulder. She cried out in pain. He was about to swing to hit her with his fist, but he recognized her by asking her if it was Teacher Zhao. She said to make him believe her. Qin Yu turned his head back, looking at the Bai Xiao lying on the floor who had been badly beaten by him, and said, "Well." Teacher Zhao smiled and said that she thanked him for his trust. She ordered the beaten man to be taken quickly to the infirmary, and in her mind, she was already thinking that the white dogs would definitely want to deal with it. And considering who Qin Yu was, it wouldn't be easy. Teacher Zhao looked around slyly, and then she thought of a cunning combination. Since that's the case, why not? She approached Qin Yu and offered to be his senior class representative. He couldn't believe what he heard. Next, the story continues in the principal's office. Teacher Zhao stood in front of the headmaster and two others from the school's leadership sitting at the table. Director Li, Tiger, asked Xiao Zhao what she thought of Qin Yu's action. She replied that she thought he was right, because it was student Bai who was the first to break the rules and attack Yu Li. Deputy Director Lu, Deer, sitting with his arms crossed, inquired about whether this circumstance gave him the right to beat up a person. Deputy Director Yang, Baran, smoked a cigarette and raised his hands so that his tattoos were visible, and asked what the problem was. Why Bai Xiao himself can beat someone up and he can't? What a double standard. The The principal reminded that it should not be forgotten that Qin Yu is a special student, and if he is found innocent, it could cause a public outcry. The teacher indicated that she had a suggestion for this. However, while doing so, she hid her hand with stripped marks. She voiced a suggestion. Qin Yu should become the representative of the senior classes. Vice Principal Yang flared up when he saw the injured arm. Xiao Zhao is an excellent warrior, he asked. Maybe she was threatened by other teachers. Xiao Zhao explained how she got those marks. When she tried to stop him, he clung to her arm so hard that it left a mark. How on earth could an ordinary warrior overcome her defenses? Teacher Zhao continued that the one was special, and he was well worthy of representing the school. The principal and his two deputies thought about what they had said. The deputy director, taking a drag on his cigar, advised making it official before the dogs caused further problems. The matter is closed. She smiled, turned sideways to them, and added that defeating Bai Xiao couldn't be undone. They would still come, and wished them good luck. The principal sat still in his chair, wondering if she was using them for her own purposes. Further events also took place in the principal's office a few hours later. In the principal's office, Yu Li and her mother and Bai Xiao and her father were sitting opposite each other on the sofas. In front of them sat the principal and his two deputies. He greeted the people who had come. The director started the conversation saying that the reason he had gathered everyone together was known to them, so he decided to get straight to the point. Yu Li sat together with her mom on the couch and watched quietly across the room. She was laughing quietly. Across from them sat Bai Xiao, badly beaten with his arm and leg in a cast. Next to him sat his father, who had a bird on his shoulder. Yu Li barely held back a smile and asked Bai Xiao why Qin Yu was the one who got him so beaten up. The latter hissed something similar to that little bastard since he couldn't speak normally. The president of White Dogs indicated that he respected Yuni's contribution on the battlefield, and that his son wanted to ask for forgiveness, so they would ask for anything but to give that asshole to him. Yuna smiled back at him, saying that she couldn't give him back because she needed him for herself. He looked intently at her, continuing that she didn't want to settle, and he's only treating her with respect because of her old exploits on the battlefield. She listened silently to what the director of White Dogs was saying and looked at him. Both the president and his bird stared at her intently, and threateningly adding that if they didn't give him Qin Yu willingly, they would hire a man to kill him. And Ego wondered how it was that 10 years ago, she had only managed to survive alone, and her order had become merely nominal. Yu Li was very angry at his words, and she blurted out back to him what he was saying, uncle. She clenched her fingers into fists with force, and the next moment she was already yelling for the old man to shut his mouth. She was very angry. But suddenly she felt Jamaica's hand on her shoulder. She stopped her from saying anything further. Next, Yuna entered the conversation. She asked President Bai if she could see his words as a direct threat to her family. The director and his two deputies sat covered in cold sweat from the tension in the office. President Bai started to object to Yu Yang that Qin Yu was a demon and not a member of her family, but she stood there without moving. Looks like she really cares for him, thought one of the deputy directors, sipping a cigarette. He voiced that everyone knows what the Knights of the Order are, for they can kill even the king himself if their relatives are in danger. He thought about it further, but he didn't dare to voice it out. Especially Raymond, the deputy head of the Storm Knights. He also heard that they were with Yuna in the past. Yuna turned to President Bai, muttered that since he had no other alternative, they went. The one was yelling at her to remember that the one wasn't so simple, and he wasn't a member of her family. He was the devil. One day he's gonna go crazy and kill them. She tapped her heels confidently and quickly on the floor as she left the principal's office. On her way out of the office, she added that she had made a bet with a man. They were betting on whether he would awaken his true nature and become a monster. Deputy director with a cigar in his mouth complimented her that this man bet that he would go crazy. She smiled and said no, that was her bet. But if it happened, she'd work it out. Qin Yun sneezed heavily. He wondered what kind of asshole was bringing him up right now. His teacher sent him there without saying a word, and he didn't even give his consent to participate. The buses travel on a road that lies near a beautiful forest, but there was boredom on the bus. Qin Yu looked through the window of a passing bus. There, he saw a girl. She was rubbing her sword. Turning her head, she saw Qin Yu looking at her. Turning her head to the side, she excitedly blurted out. He laughed to himself, after all, not long ago. Many people thought he was a bull. After all, one of his horns was broken. Though he calls himself a child of war. He looked at her again, and thought he should tease her a little now. He put his hand to the window and began to say that he was a demon hiding his true power for a long time, to destroy everyone one day. The girl sat in a cold sweat of fear. He continued, "Long live the demon race," and started laughing. The girl was already hysterical, tears pouring from her eyes. She ran through the interior of the bus shouting, "Stop! There are demons following us. They want to destroy us." All the passengers and the driver were very surprised and frightened. Chaos ensued on the bus. It swayed and lurched past a passing building. Chin-Yu was receiving energy charges from the hostility from the neighboring bus at this time, and was pleased with himself. He felt good. It would be good to harvest this kind of energy every time. After a while of riding the bus slowed down and stopped, reaching its destination. Chin-Yu got off the bus and stopped, surprised by what he saw. There were a lot of people around him, balloons with flags floating in the sky, and some voice urged to take their seats as the competition would soon begin. He walked amongst the cheering crowd, noticing that there were quite a few people around. Chin-Yu was satisfied. Considering around, he liked it there. To himself, he resembled a handsome boy picking wild onions in his wicker basket. He was amused and interested. He noticed his energy replenishing from the hostility again, but this energy was familiar. Chin-Yu saw Aunt Yu-Nu in the distance, and Yu-Li was standing with her. The two of them smiled and showed him class, cheering him on. It looked like Auntie had recognized what Bai Xiao had done and decided to show him kindness. He should repay such a gift properly. Chin-Yu stood in the middle of the crowd, with his aunt and Yu-Li looking at him, his hands in his pockets. Just as suddenly, he extended his right hand and showed them his middle finger. Yu-Li immediately flared up. She angrily shrieked that Chin-Yu was an asshole, and his energy once again increased with hostility. He walked among the others and thought to keep everyone angry, for then he would be made stronger. There was a ring in the middle of the stadium, where the announcer began telling the ladies and gentlemen that the high school league competition had officially begun. He went on to say that these competitions are supported by 123 companies and honorable orders of knighthoods. 24 regiments of knights had arrived as honorary observers. All the observers stared sternly at the ring without taking their eyes off the ring. They stood up and began chanting their slogans of valor and justice. The next regiment shouted harmony loudly. The crowd was buzzing furiously in anticipation of the start of the competition. Chin-Yu stood among the others and looked at them skeptically. The host continued that humans and werewolves are united, because together they are a force, and their strength is in their unity. He hoped that the participants would lead the country to a brilliant future. He asked for more applause and welcomed the best students. Chin-Yu stood on the podium with his arms crossed and thought that someone else would come. After all, this was a great opportunity to earn more energy. An electronic scoreboard appeared in the middle of the stadium. The announcer announced that each participant would have 5 minutes to introduce themselves. All the contestants lined up for the performance, and the host reminded them that the entire continent would be watching. Participants came out, saluted, and said something about themselves and their plans for life. One said that he wanted to become famous, while the other said that the human race was invincible, and everyone would witness it. Chin-Yu wondered how he should introduce himself. In front of him, the participant had already introduced himself and walked off the stage. Now it was his turn. He walked leisurely to the middle of the stage. There were lanterns shining all around. He was still thinking about what to say that would be memorable to everyone. Then he smiled. He had come up with an unforgettable greeting. Chin-Yu called out to everyone with a note of arrogance and superiority, saying, "Hey scum, look here." At this moment, he stretched his 2 hands forward and held out his middle finger at the same time. Everyone stared at him in shock, and Yu-Li even covered her face with her hands, whispering something that she didn't know him. The principal asked Teacher Zhao if Chin-Yu was overreacting. She hesitated for a moment and replied that she might be. And then the Fox host appeared, talking about the announcement of the rules of the competition. He said that this time 1,358 contestants would go to Nova Island for a whole week. They will be provided with food for the first 3 days, but beyond that, they have to find their own provisions on their own. All participants stood around an interactive map of the island. But beforehand, tens of thousands of monsters were released onto the island. The embittered beasts were from the Demon Gate. They are true killing machines. They were divided into levels of strength from 1 to 5. The monsters have energy balls implanted in their bodies. The more orbs, the higher the final rating will be. After this round, the top 100 students will be selected for the final battle in the arena. The presenter further went on to talk about the achievement of their scientists. These are balloons that can not only show the participants live, but also save their lives in critical moments. One of the participants was looking at her hand, which had a belt on it, and the presenter continued that using this miracle of technology, the participant will be disqualified, and the belts show the state of the moment. Chin-Yu also looked at his hand with interest, and listened further about how once the participant's condition deteriorated, the ball would carry them to the arena, but that would also be a disqualification. The lead man and another thug assistant said to get ready to depart and drove off. This bulky man stood at the side of the ring, raised his arm up and started using a special technique. He raised his hands in the air and said, "Turn back time." All the participants were covered by a magic ring. Chin Yu stood with his head up in the crowd of similar participants and watched with interest to see what was going on. And at some point, the bulky man spread his arms out and down. The clouds parted, and the magic ring disappeared. There were no more contestants in the arena. Chin Yu found himself on a padded seat inside the flying airplane and looked out the porthole. The airplane flew between the clouds, and Chin Yu thought that this was a very unusual technique, however. Suddenly, he was distracted by the shouts of a demon. He started looking around for the demon. He wanted to see where that demon was. Then he realized it was him they were talking about. The other members pounced on Chin Yu, shouting that the demon was not alive. Chin Yu only thought that it shouldn't be like this. Everyone except the contestants remained in the arena. Yuli turned to her mom as to whether she thought that jerk Chin Yu would be able to get a good position. Her mom answered her that there was no way. Yuli didn't stop asking why, because he was strong enough, even stronger than her. Yuna replied that no matter how strong he was, his efforts were in vain, because this region had been fighting demons for thousands of years. She went on to say that the other players would not allow him to take a good position in this environment. Yuli was very upset, because Chin Yu was not like all demons. She watched Chin Yu struggling with the other contestants in the airplane and silently wished him luck. In the commotion, a cry could be heard on the airplanes to kill the demon, to sacrifice him to their fallen warriors. And Chin Yu had already started to reply that he was joking. No, he was not a demon. But one of the competitors wouldn't stop, shouting not to listen to Chin Yu. He should be killed first and get rid of the competitor. Chin Yu only thought that he was hitting him like a punching bag. They continued to fight. Chin Yu replied to him saying that in such a case, he should not be blamed and would get punched in the face. Chin Yu was alone against the crowd and that bold participant who was lashing out at him the most. But he easily threw punches and was still able to bring his opponent down. That participant fell down, beaten up after asking what Chin Yu called him. Chin Yu addressed the defeated man so that he wouldn't misunderstand him. He wasn't talking about him. He continued, talking about... At this point, he had already put his backpack on his back, and everyone else froze waiting to see who he would name. And smiling full mouth finally finished the phrase. Everyone here, and with his hand pointed a finger down. Everyone around them erupted and prepared to fight with renewed vigor. At this time, Chin Yu was receiving a charge of extreme hatred. Chin Yu smilingly put his hand forward, palm facing his opponents. He gathered his fingers into a fist, gathered his strength, and told the assholes to move their flippers. Unexpectedly, he punched a wall in the airplane with his fist, and saying that the rest of the participants were kapusha, jumped out of the airplane down. Behind him, several participants were blown away by the wind. Everyone in the arena gasped when they saw what was happening to the contestants. They shouted, and "Oh my God," and "Look over there." One of the participants falling from the airplane shouted help. At that moment, the balloon was triggered and a beeping sound was heard. The rescue balloon was triggered automatically. The contestant will be disqualified. Chin Yu opened his parachute and descended down slowly. Around him, several participants were falling down, and when the balloon disqualified someone, he called this balloon quite useful. It also replenished his energy from hostility. The other contestants, terrified on the airplane, screamed, "What a cheap trick! What school is he from? Who is this? What's going on? Does this guy think he can act like this seriously?" Meanwhile, Chin Yu was landing in an arena somewhere in the mountainous area. He got soft on the ground and went after the landing. Seeing this, people had different reactions to Chin Yu. Yuli rejoiced at Chin Yu's successful landing, while the gentleman behind her deeply regretted that he didn't crash. That man behind Yuli covered his face with his hands and grieved loudly, shouting the elite of their school. He sat there, and then he started making sounds and shrieked that it couldn't be, and after that he fell down loudly in the arena. Yuli looked at him in surprise. She looked at him and heard shouting, "Look, that guy is done. Look who's got his eye on him." Yuli was startled to see something. Could it really be a third-level ghost bull? Chin Yu was heading to the nearest warehouse, which was 27 kilometers away. But there was someone following him from behind. Yuli had seen him earlier. It was that third-level ghost bull. He looked around and noticed it was a nasty place. An island or something. By this time, the bull had gotten a pretty good look at him and decided that he would be his target. He sprang up, steam billowing from his nostrils, and he was very frightening. And Chin Yu decided that all roads lead to Rome, so he went ahead. Yuli couldn't contain herself. She was already yelling that that one was an idiot and should be careful. While Chin Yu was deciding where he should go, there were already 2 furious bulls running after him. There were a lot of birds in the sky above him, and they were making a lot of noises, but he didn't pay any attention to it. Suddenly he was attacked by insects. She started scratching almost her entire body, asking herself where on earth there were so many insects coming from. Chin Yu turned around and saw 2 slaughtered bulls lying on the ground with their horns broken. He couldn't help but chuckle. He wondered if they wanted to come to him by themselves or what. He still appreciated that such a cool game. In the assembly hall was the principal and his 2 deputies. One of them said to the principal, "This guy wasn't that strong, was he?" The principal asked if they had any ideas. And they settled on the fact that this guy was raised by Yu Na, a hero of the Night Order. No wonder he was so strong. He should have been tested first. At this time, Chin-Yu started to eat something, opening his mouth wide to take a bigger bite at once. The deputy director wanted to ask Xiao Zhao in which course she was taught how to deal with such monsters, but she said that she was not in any course. The second deputy director, a little surprised, exclaimed that the bastard had learned how to deal with such monsters by himself. Chin-Yu took a big bite out of the energy balls. The 2 vice principals and Zhao's teacher were completely shocked and simultaneously shouted what. They further continued to be amazed and outraged at the same time. After all, he was eating energy balls. After all, it was a key item to pass the mission. Had he forgotten the rules? Teacher Zhao said that he should remember, and the second vice principal said that he would rather eat them than the monsters. Chin-Yu took out the energy balls and ate them, completely forgetting about the rules. He didn't eat meat since he didn't know how to cook anyway. Next, he vigorously stood up and said it was time to start scoring points. He carried the cubs away from the bear woman to get energy points from hostility. Next, he ripped the fangs out of a bobcat. It growled under a tree at him and got energized by the hostility as well. In the hawk's nest squeezed his egg. The hawk hovered over it and really wanted to tear it apart, still hating it as much as the other animals. The arena watched his actions. There were various phrases flying in his direction, that this asshole didn't think about his life, and that it was too much. He put on some kind of dragon costume and managed to taunt a snake. He also got energy. Next, he was walking through a meadow and saw a puppy. He thought he had never seen one before. Wearing a dragon costume on his head and with a snake on his belt, he darted toward the pup. Grabbing the tips of his ears, he yelled out that he had caught it. But how disappointed he was, for under his ears someone began to yip. It was a girl. He was scared out of his wits, even covered in sweat. The 3 sister doggies were talking to each other. The second sister, Doggy Yo-Yo, asked her 2 sisters what was wrong with the 5th sister. She was trapped. They had seen Chin-Yu catch their sister and were now glaring menacingly at the unseen beast. Their sister saw them and started calling for help. They each armed themselves with their own weapons and told the one not to be afraid, for they were coming to help. Chin-Yu saw all of this and began to quickly make excuses, raising his hands. After all, it was not what they thought. There had been a misunderstanding. 5th sister Doggy Coco sat and cried bitterly. 4th sister Dog Lan Lan smiled and praised Chin-Yu, saying that he wasn't bad. 3rd sister Doggy Kiki was upset and only wished him dead. 2nd sister Doggy Yo was very serious and said that boy they understand. They went on to say that it was a misunderstanding. They stood in front of him, and he was sitting there covered in blood and holding his head. He asked why they had done that to him, because if it wasn't for his brother, he would have died already. He said he was a human being too, and they were really dogs. Chin-Yu asked what now, and the Doggy sisters recognized him as the guy they saw back then, and decided that it was more interesting to see him live. And the sisters began to look at him, for it was he. And Chin-Yu was interested in one question, which one of them could cook. He took off the snake and crocodile. The Doggy sisters were very surprised. And then the girls became animated, each saying something and a little, "I know how, she too, and can I?" One of the sisters was skillfully slicing the meat with a large knife. The other was marinating meat, and he watched contentedly. The next sister was building a fire to roast it all, and he happily remarked that it was like watching a cooking show. And another sister was cooking food in a frying pan, stirring. He thought that now he felt as if he would open the lid, and the food would be made of gold, because they were trying so hard. And now the dish with the animal's head was cooked. It was still very hot. Shit, he thought when he saw the dish. He looked at the dish and couldn't understand how the preparation could be right and the result like this. After all, this crocodile was angrier than when he had killed it. The girls surrounded him and asked him why he was not eating. But he said that it was no longer a meal, but suicide. The girls laughingly said that guests are fed first, let him treat himself. Chin-Yu replied that those were so polite to him, and there were so many of them, and the crocodile was small, and there was not much to eat, and he was used to being hungry, so he wanted to give them a treat. They flatly shouted and waved their hands that no, because it was all for him. The girls wanted to force him to eat the food they had prepared. He offered the older ones first. They said they protested that they wanted him to eat. Suddenly, during their pleas, they heard a voice telling the bastard to let her sisters go. A sword flew in the air. It spun hard at first, and then abruptly fell beside Chin-Yu. He missed the cauldron with the prepared food and asked in surprise that another one. Another sister dog ran at him. As she ran, her sword swirled near her again. She grabbed the sword by the hilt at the last moment in front of Chin-Yu. He turned his head in the direction of what was happening, sweating a little from the exertion. Sister Doggy swung around to strike, but then her sister called out to her, and Chin Yu exclaimed in surprise that it was her. The sisters stood and watched as their another sister swung her sword at Chin Yu. He grabbed the hair of his sister, whom he caught in the meadow, and very quickly he put her out in front of him and she started scouting her sis. But her sister had already swung and the sword flew over her head, slicing off a few strands of hair. The sword sister was angry. The sister in the hands of the smiling Chin Yu was sobbing. The sister who came last called him a devil, and at that time the energy was replenished again by the girl's hostility. The girl dog that was in Chin Yu's hand started pounding him and screaming at him to let her go, because he was a fierce demon. He threw her with force, so hard that she flew far away and hit, whimpering. Her sisters began to examine her and see if she was all right. Chin Yu continued to mock them. Now he was saying that they have such big ears that hang down the sides. Surely they are not dachshunds. The last sister pointed her sword at him and said that he was a dachshund, a one-horned devil. She wouldn't stand for it, because he was just bullying them. She took the handle with her other hand and stretched it out. And angry with that unusual long-handled sword, she shouted that she would tear his horns off. Trying to dodge the blow, he asked if she was serious, since her sisters had tried to poison him. The girl dogs behind her sister grouped up and prepared to attack. Chin Yu was a little scared and asked them what kind of gang warfare this was. They had him pinned against a tree, pointing their weapons. He wondered if he wasn't the protagonist. He turned to face the tree, hugging the trunk, and asked what they had decided to pounce on, and further shouted at them to come on. He plucked a tree from the root and started swinging it around, knocking down the sister doggies. The sister who came last thought that he had a lot of strength in him, and the sisters couldn't handle him. She had to do it herself, so she started yelling, "Watch out!" She waved her miracle sword diligently and angrily, and he set her up with a tree trunk. And then he noticed that her tool could be used instead of a pencil sharpener. He started running fast on the ground. He had to find a way to stop her. He ran with the sharpened tree trunk in his hands toward his rival. But she thrust the sword right into the inside of the tree trunk. And then something happened that she couldn't have guessed. The sword was in the shaft. As she started to pull it out, she realized the worst had happened. The sword was stuck. Chin Yu began to gloat that did she really think of pulling her hair with him. He further added that he was going to cut off the talk. He was going to pull her hair. And swinging the trunk of the tree, he flung it far away, and with it flew the girl. He wished her well. She stood up, holding her nose with her hand, and mumbled, "Combat technique, ground impact." And with all her strength, she threw him to the ground. He landed and yelped because he hadn't been warned about this. She was very angry at this point. She split the trunk into small, sharp pieces and launched them at Chin Yu. Next, she was gathering her strength again, bringing all her skills to bear. Yuli told Yunei that this girl has the 3rd level. Yuna calmly looked at what was happening and said that this kind of performance in a girl of her age was rare and that she had a great future. Yuli watched and commented on what she saw. The soil flew apart at a great speed, leaving great damage. These clods of earth were like bullets. Chin Yu tiredly struggled with the little dog girl, but stood on the ground without falling down. She noted to herself that he had managed to stay on the ground, maybe because he was a child of the devil. The girl continued to wonder if he was really invulnerable. She had heard that demons on the other side were immune to such attacks, but not him. Chin Yu, barely standing, realized that this girl's strength was indeed deadly. He shouldn't let her attack him again. She tried to attack him again, but he figured he could answer her in close combat. And the girl realized he couldn't be allowed to get any closer. The girl's foot hit the ground hard, and the ground began to crumble. She sneezed hard and began to spin around. Chin Yu began to use his power that could lift the ground. He looked at her very intently. His feet were barely off the ground. He was able to move over these piles of earth by jumping them very high. The girl was furious and yelled, "Come over." And once again she directed her new power at him. She was aiming straight for his head. Chin Yu kicked his foot into the tree trunk. The tree snapped, absorbed the power, and began to burn. She realized that he was trying to distract her by using the smoke to engage her in hand-to-hand combat. The girl was a dog, immune to smoke, so he miscalculated. She angrily thought she would get him. With a swing of her sword, she hooked something. It wasn't right away that she realized what it was. Suddenly her throat was squeezed by someone's hand, and she heard that she had lost. There were passions in the arena. Those watching the contest were outraged. He had played foul. He had awakened a 3rd-ranked player. A foul should be called for such dirty tricks. Yuli cheerfully supported Chin Yu with the words, "Keep it up," while Yuna pondered whether the Chin Yu she knows is really so strong. Mom looked at her daughter and realized that he had plenty of opportunities to do something about Yuli, but he didn't do anything about it. Why, maybe it was just like Yuli said. Yuna was looking at the screen where the guy was sitting with the dog girls by the fire. She started to ask herself one question. This guy is not like other demons. Chin Yu showed the sister of the dog girls a cauldron of boiled crocodile and pronounced that it was proof that they wanted to kill him. She smiled and mumbled that she didn't think his devilish digestive system could handle it. Besides, looks are deceiving. He angrily said deceptively, Then he wanted to watch her eat it. This startled them. The sister knew it was inedible and needed to turn his attention to something else. Suddenly, she happily remembered where she could get something edible. But he was stern. He fed the girl a cooked meal. Naturally, she got poisoned and foaming from her mouth, the other girls shouted sister. And Chin Yu regretted rushing over. After all, she wanted to tell him where to eat. On the third day, there was a conversation near the helicopter that he would have gone back that day still, but it didn't work out. The other replied that there was nothing wrong with distributing food a day later. The guy suggested eating kebabs, as cold they are not as tasty. Suddenly, something came like a hurricane, and the kebab disappeared from his hands. Suddenly, one of the workers on the branch saw a girl doggy with a kebab in her mouth. She said they had good food here. She was still sitting on the branch. The workers appealed to her that there was no need to snatch food. There was plenty of it. But someone slapped the girl worker on the back and she lost consciousness. Chin Yu said fine, and one of the sisters said eat up, it's all ours. And the workers unconsciously lay on the ground. Near the fire sat Chin Yu and his sisters. That one said beef, chicken, fish, lamb, and sister Doggy was happy to be gifted chicken legs. The other sisters shouted that it was all for them. The sisters were talking amongst themselves. She was right. There was plenty of food. And thanks to her sister, they had even managed to get some wings. Next came a voice that said, "Stop talking and pass the garlic." She stared at something in horror and called out loudly to her sister. On the ground lay a certificate in the name of Clara from the 3rd distribution group. Chin Yu and her sister only interjected, "What?" Next thing you know, she's yelling, "Hurry up and grab the food and get out of here before anyone finds out. The girls have to hurry so they don't get caught in the ring." Some kind of milieu could be seen behind, the sister telling the others that they were late. Chin Yu said calmly to those, "Don't worry," and perhaps they would get more than what they wanted. The participants were running to the resource point. One of them asked the captain if it was useless to run there. The captain replied that due to an accident, 90% of the participants had jumped off halfway and were unable to get provisions. He did not think they would let everyone starve to death. According to the commander's assumption, the dots will disappear when all the contestants have taken what's theirs. It's true. They were looking at the supply crates. The commander turned, said hello, and said they were here for provisions. The man in an employee suit replied, "Welcome and glad you made it." The commander said they were down to 4, and he thanked them for their work. The employee asked what rank of supplies they wanted, and there was a horn sticking out from under his cap. The participants couldn't understand what he was talking about. Rank of supplies. The worker opened a box of different kinds of food and said that it was only natural, because the competition was at a high level. You can't leave them to their fate. Hungry participants shouted out that they wanted a D set. The worker informed them that there were 4 sets of rank 3, and they needed to prepare 4 balls of energy for payment. The commander was very much amazed at the payment. The employee asked, "Of course, didn't you know that only cheese in a mousetrap is free?" The commander began to smile, and said he was told about humanity. Aren't they the main ones in this competition? The employee cheerfully told me that of course because Kit A was free of charge. He held water and bars in his hands. The commander couldn't go for it after all. 4 balls was all they had earned these days. The sisters sitting behind the boxes waited for Chin Yu. A sister asked if he would be able to exchange the energy balls for a resource. The other replied that they only had to believe. The employee holding the bottle thought he already had them on the hook. "Take it." And he went on to say that he didn't think there would be any takers so quickly. The commander flared up. What was it the employee was talking about, wanting pity? The worker went black, saying he hadn't said anything. The commander couldn't calm down. He asked me to tell him exactly what was going on, because he would pay. The employee, holding his head up, said okay. It's not like he's some kind of tyrant. Dropping the bottle and the bars, he started to say that he had heard it in passing, and they should promise not to tell anyone. And he further asked ominously if they knew why resources were divided into ranks. The participants stood with their mouths open with interest, because it is a hidden bonus item. Those who spend energy orbs to buy it will be rewarded at the end with double the amount of energy orbs at the end of the game. Overseeing it all were 5 sisters and 2 bonded workers. The dog girls exclaimed joyfully that everything had worked out. 4 participants excitedly asked if it was true. The employee replied that of course. That one has a nice face and he won't tell others. Those in confusion interjected to the others. The employee pointed a finger in the direction, and they were approached by a group of participants who were shouting, "Hurry up, quickly get the supplies." The commander took out 4 balls and traded them for a set of Ds. He heard back that this was a wise decision. The girls watched as one group left their friend and the second group approached. The dog girl said that it worked. Cool. And Chin Yu is not short of brains. The real workers sat on the ground, naked and with their hands bound and gags in their mouths. In the arena, arguments started after what they had seen. They shouted at the director that he was to blame for what had happened. How Chin Yu had pulled it off and tied up the workers. What kind of demon was this? Even with dogs, it was cheating. It was against the rules. Let him return the balls. The director smiled. Is this kind of thing against the rules? It's called resource sharing. The deputy director appealed to the others that they should be pleased that someone had thought of such an ingenious way of doing things, and whether they wanted the balloons back. Other principals were very upset. They asked what their students should do. The second deputy director said about the reason for this showdown. After all, if there had been a violation of the rules, it would have been reported already. And since there was no violation, it means that everything is fine. The crowd in the arena was saying, "Damn demon, can't anyone stop him?" The worker's hand folded the 4 balls of energy into a casket. Chin Yu, wearing an employee costume, invited visitors to join them, congratulating them on their excellent choices, once again trading food for energy balls. Suddenly, a helicopter arrived. Participants started shouting that they had been tricked and it was not from the staff. The participants brought back what they had swapped and wanted the energy balls back. One of the workers started shouting that they wanted free resources, and they were tied up and presented themselves as them for their own gain. The participants were very angry. There was hostility from everyone. 2 groups of participants met together and asked who else it was. They started looking for where that worker had gone, yelling to get the balloons back, but they ran away. Chin Yu, satisfied with himself, said that it was not in vain that they had pulled everything off, as the remaining energy was very large. Chin Yu ran ahead, and the dog girls ran after him. One of them asked him how many balls he had changed, to which he replied, "What does it matter?" The girl smiled and said that any number of balls would do. He thought to himself that it was up to his balls, and started to say "I don't," but didn't finish the sentence. The air was cut by the sound of a flying arrow. Together they began to fight her off. The girl, kicking the arrow away with her foot, asked who else it was. Cutting through the air, the spears flew towards them. With a deft movement, someone caught the spear with his hand. There were 3 people standing in front of them. The one who had caught the spear was telling the little girl that she had excellent reactions. The girl said it would be sad to say goodbye to life with such outstanding credentials. There were 2 companies facing each other, the ones who had exchanged the balloons and the ones who met them on the way. Chin Yu looked at them and thought, welcome, unwelcome guest. The dog girl reminded Chin Yu that snake people were excellent warriors, especially good at hand-to-hand combat, and rhinoceroses had a huge reserve of strength. Apparently the hooded man is the most dangerous of them all. The new trio pondered how they would divide them all up. That long one is the strongest. You can give it to the other one. The smaller warrior replied that the bigger size meant less speed and faster death. Next, the hooded one said she would deal with the dogs and the other would take the long one. The warrior approached the 2 uniformed men with her spear. Sister Doggy told the others not to get involved. Those agreed. The warrior with the spear turned to Chin Yu, saying that he was the one she would be heading to the most. Next, she continued she wouldn't mind having some fun with him. Chin Yu replied to her saying such a thing to him. He is from a decent family. He will be misunderstood. And the dog girls asked if he should lead them to victory. The spear lady giggled. They seemed to be having a good time, but now they would play with him. She launched her spear at him and added until he lost. One of the dog sisters told Chin Yu to be careful. He took the spear by the stick and said he was not so cruel, for he let him prove himself. The 2 of them hold the spear. He asked if she wanted to set a small goal for herself, like playing until the first tier. They were being watched. One large warrior and the other hooded. The dog girls tried to support Chin Yu, so he asked his rival. He pulled harder on his spear. The warrior approached him, and in her he recognized his aunt. She glared at him and shouted angrily, "Die!" and started throwing punches at him. Auntie accelerated again and struck again. Behind her, behind the girl, Doggy drew her sword. The girl dog tried to call out to Chin Yu, but from behind her, a hulk covered in black smoke began to loom behind her. It was the hulking thing that stood behind him, covered in black mist and holding a stone in its hands. From the impact, the girl fell unconscious. Explosions erupted on the island. Chin Yu fell among the trees, breaking his stovepipe into several pieces, and asked why she hated him so much. He replied that he didn't know what to do. Auntie was making a sprawl on the ground and shouting that instead of trying to save herself, and she said he'd better think about his last words before he died, and ran forward with her spear. Chin Yu thought that he should improve his body with the system. He said the dynamic vision is perfect. Swinging his fist, he realized the power was perfect. The ant staggered back from Chin Yu's punches. There were traces of blood on the grass. He couldn't miss, but a cut appeared on his arm, blood dripping from it. He realized that the naturally flexible body of the descendants of the snake tribe had robbed him of most of his strength. It was her slippery scales. Because of this, the direction of his strike changed and he hurt himself on the spear. Auntie replied that it was a good shot. She was standing across from the guy. Auntie smiled. It's a shame we're born to kill monsters like him. She crouched for another punch and yelled out that she wanted his legs. He looked at her with anger and confirmed for himself that he had less combat experience. She hissed caustically, anticipating victory. He tried to run away from her, and he himself nestled against the trunk of a tree and asked, "And who said he wanted to run away?" Auntie couldn't understand what Chin Yu wanted to do. He put his arm around the tree and started pulling, saying he was just warming up. And the next moment, he threw a tree trunk at Auntie. She crouched down and dodged. She told him he was a jerk because she was a snake. She crawled up to him and threateningly told him that he would pay for his ignorance. Chin-yu was worried, for he didn't know what else to do. She yelled caustically for him to remember this lesson and not call anyone Auntie. She stabbed her spear between his legs, but the wedge of the spear flew off, shattering. She was in shock, not realizing what had happened. Unexpectedly, she was grabbed by Chin-yu's neck. He replied that he had finally caught her. He had only thrown the tree to distract her and attack from below, but he hadn't expected her to be ruthless. Chin-yu was still holding her by the neck the same way. She resented that he had calculated everything and blocked her attack. Isn't this the most vulnerable spot of any man? He lifted her up on his outstretched arm by her neck with words maybe she could hear, and went on to say that there are balls of steel and started laughing. Now he wanted to think together about what to do with her. 4 girl dogs attacked the second warrior girl while their sister fought the tall girl. One of the girl dogs said she couldn't handle her because she was incredibly fast and her speed was very great. The warrior girl stood, yawning, and said that her opponent was too weak for the one to pique her interest. Suddenly, she saw a strand of severed black hair on the grass. It belonged to an acquaintance of hers. The girl quickly rushed to her aid. She was lying almost unconscious. She turned to her friend, who was lying crouched on the ground, calling her Snake and wondering what was wrong with her. Snake lay there, barely breathing, with eyes full of tears, and whispered that she couldn't go on. Snake's friend flared up and shouted through her teeth, "What the hell did that guy do?" The dog girls repeated the same question to themselves. What had this demon done to this snake? Chin-yu stood smiling at them and said, "What nonsense." He was just trying out his new technique on her. He thought that she had made him stronger with her aggression. He continued onward, that suddenly a new world opened up to him. The girl with Snake in her arms was looking at him from under her forehead, frowning. She quietly replied that he had managed to defeat Snake. It seems her opinion of him was wrong. He was worthy of being her opponent. The girl sitting beside Snake put her hands behind her back, pulling out her weapon. She told him to approach. Chin-yu said optimistically to himself that he could handle this opponent now. Suddenly some sort of whirlwind appeared in front of him. He jerked back slightly in surprise. But the next second, the girl's sharp weapon was at his throat. She introduced herself. Her name is Tang Lian. Chin-yu smiled and replied to her that she was good, and under his head, the metal of a sharp, cold weapon glittered. She started to thrust her short swords at him, but he intercepted and held her arms back while saying that she looked good in an assassin's costume. Chin-yu tried to push her away by holding her hands. The dog girl's conversation was heard from the side that he had decided to fight the assassin on his own. What a fool he is. And Tang Lian said that this guy managed to make her angry. The guy laughed a little. She seemed to be calm before that. At this time, she was angrily trying to stab him. The two of them fought while the dog girls watched them, shouting out, "No, be careful because she's not that easy." Ever since she was a child, she had been raised as a killing machine. Her speed was unrivaled. Tang Lian at this moment moved away from Chin-yu to attack him with renewed vigor. She swung her dagger forcefully and the tip of it passed over Chin-yu's leg. Blood seeped through his pants. Tang Lian was already on the other side and attacked again with a cry of "Die." This time, the dagger hit Chin-yu's lower back. There was also blood coming out. And he noted that Tang Lian was indeed very fast. He didn't have time to react. The guy tried to follow the girl, but she was moving very fast and he couldn't catch her. She put the knife to his throat again and said that if this was his maximum, it would soon be over. And Chin-yu noted that this girl's capabilities were far superior to the skills of a snake. Chin-yu decided to try to run away from the girl, but she wasn't far away from him. Soon it had almost caught up with him. He realized that his opponent's speed was vastly superior, and the trail of fire caught up with him. Fiery tongues tried to sting him from all sides. He barely fended off the attacks, recognizing that he was having a hard time resisting and not having time to react to the attacks. Fire beams surrounded him. Tang Lian attacked him very quickly in the middle of the green forest. Everyone was worried about him, both the dog girls and Teacher Zhao, who whispered his name. The people in the arena had different reactions to this fight. The representatives of the school where Tang Lian was from were delighted, saying, "Smart guy, that's all. Destroy him, kick his ass, smash him." And the agitated headmaster and both of his deputies nervously watched the fight, clearly worried about Chin-yu. Yuli was angry at him since he couldn't lose to anyone but herself. Yuna reassured her daughter, saying, "It's not that bad, look at his face." The girl was covered in cold sweat. She watched his face through the touchscreen. Yuna noted that he hadn't spent all these years for nothing after all. He must have a plan. Chin-yu stood there and couldn't fight back. He thought that even though he was inferior to her in speed, and he had zero experience in killing, he would just die of exhaustion trying to fight back. But there was only one way to fix the situation. He contemplated this method, but he also received a mark on his cheek and blood instantly appeared there. A guy with many small and not so small wounds on his body started screaming. He said that Tang Lian was a talentless old lady. She didn't even hit him. And how dare she call herself a warrior? He thought that he should make her kill him as quickly as possible. All the spectators in the arena were in complete shock and confusion, some asking what. Qin Yu looked her rival around. Telling her not to hide was enough. He was offering to fight as it was supposed to be fought. And if she didn't want to beat him, then let her massage him. He agreed that he would give her 5 stars and even visit her next time. He was sheathed with renewed vigor and began to be wounded by a ring of fire that he barely fought off. But he kept bringing her out saying she was his killing machine too. That's a total lie. And he was bleeding from every one of his many wounds. In the arena, Yu Li held her mom's hand with fright. She asked her what they should do. Maybe it's time to order a coffin. He's a big guy, we'll have to customize it. Auntie Yuna stared intently at the screen and tried to figure out what he was up to. And Qin Yu wasn't taking out his rival for nothing. After all, she hated him for his words, and his energy rose from her hostility. He couldn't figure out who the girl was, why she wouldn't respond to his provocations. If things continued like this, he would really be exhausted to death. The main problem with killers like her is the lack of restraint. Tang Lian started attacking the guy again. He, on the other hand, decided that he needed to keep it up. She must lose control. Only in this way would he be able to turn defeat into victory. From the excitement, he was covered in cold sweat, but he noticed that the attack was gone. This was his chance. The attack resumed with renewed vigor. Qin Yu was in a cloud of dust and a ring of fire. The ring of fire wounded the guy's shoulder with force, so that blood flew to the sides. But next, Qin Yu noticed that one had slowed down and was even able to get a glimpse of her. At this moment, Qin Yu used all of his recent savings to improve his body. His wounds were completely gone, and he now possessed more strength than he had before. He was able to hit Tang Lian very quickly. He struck again, but at her weapon. The dagger simply crumbled from the impact. She couldn't understand how it had happened. He slammed his fist into her face once more with force, and the last blow was so strong it sent her flying backwards. Next, he grabbed her leg and dragged her around a bit. She realized that the man had not intentionally provoked, and she couldn't keep her balance. Tang Lian started to fall from Qin Yu's push. She thought that she had to hold on, that she couldn't show the enemy her weakness must endure. But after hitting the ground hard, she realized that she had been concentrating hard on her desire to kill him and had let her guard down. She lay sprawled out on the ground, and all she could think was how cool everything was. She had a hard time coming to her senses, but looking up she saw something that scared her even more. Qin Yu flew at her and raised his elbow to deliver a killing blow. This was the elbow destroyer technique. Tang Lian saw the elbow in the next second in front of her eyes. And at that moment, instead of a punch from the guy, she noticed him fly quickly into the bushes. Qin Yu fell with a thunderous crash, landing near the bushes. In front of him stood the familiar Tang Lian, a huge girl who was screaming at him about how he dared to hurt her sister. And she would see how many lives he had left in reserve. Behind her lay, with her head slightly raised, Tang Lian, and his energy from hostility was replenished once again. His sister, with anger on her face, started sprawling towards the guy to avenge her sister. Tang Lian lifted herself up with her hand on her chest and exclaimed for her sister not to do this. That one stood up, gathering all his strength and received energy together, and Tang Lian's sister ran at him with shouts. She struck him hard in the face with her fist in such a way that he barely held himself up, turning his head to the side. But he remained standing, even starting to smile. And Sister Tang Lian couldn't understand why he didn't fall down after shouting what the hell. She was about to attack again, making a threatening face and saying that they warriors never give up. The dog girls who were watching all this were very worried about the guy and shouted to him, "Qin Yu, watch out." And this hulking sister began to club him as hard as she could. But he was increasing his energy from her hostility. Qin Yu skillfully began to dodge the blows, saying that big sister should have heeded the advice of little sister. Tu accelerated and straightened her arm for another strike, and shouted at him that she was not to be underestimated. He stared intently at her big fist and started to smile a little. Unexpectedly for big sister Tang Lian, the guy straightened his hand with his palm towards her fist, and he fell right into Qin Yu's steel trap. The guy caught her fist with his palm, squeezing it tightly, and its owner was a little startled. Taking her fist in his grip, he was able to twist her arm and throw it. At this time, all of her garments for protection crumbled from her body. Tears came to her eyes. She tried to cover her breasts with her hands. Qin Yu couldn't take his gaze away from her breasts, saying that they were so big. Immediately, his hostility energy increased by a record number. With his side vision, he saw a flying spear and began to dodge it. While he was distracted, Tang Lian picked up her older sister who was covering herself with scraps from her clothes. They were running away from him. There were 3 figures moving away from the guy. They were Tang Lian, her older sister, and Snake. Tang Lian shouted to him that she remembered him, and Qin Yu said that unfortunately, he had to let all 3 opponents go. The dog girls came up to him and told him that Devil Boy was a tough guy. He looked at his hands and noted that even though his body felt pain, it was healing rather quickly. Next, he turned to the girl dogs. He urged them to come with him because he needed to raise his ranking. He thought to himself that physical fitness was good, but he had to find a way to attract more people and get more energy. They happily shouted okay and ran forward across the green lawn amidst the forest. In the center of the zone, there was a battle between the monsters and the participants. Level 2, Bighorned Worms. Several people tried to subdue them. The dog girls and Qin Yu were watching from the bushes. They asked the guy if they would go there. Qin Yu replied with a smile. "What's the rush? Aren't they couriers? There are a lot of people there now, and the boss should not sit idle." Suddenly, a big scary monster in the form of a female beetle appeared. The participants who were fighting the worms started screaming and running away. This monster was very unusual. The top part belonged to a beautiful girl with shapes and several arms, and below the waist it had the body of a black beetle. The dog girl screamed in horror that it was a level 5 monster, aka the evil bug queen. Qin Yu looked at her intently and whispered, "Here she comes." One of the dog girls wanted to stop the guy, saying that they couldn't defeat her. But Qin Yu replied that they wouldn't act on their own. She looked at him as he rose, but still didn't understand what he meant. Suddenly, he started shouting loudly that here was the queen in front of him. "Guys, move it. A lot of energy will fall from her. There won't be another chance like this." The sisters were confused by his actions. Participants who heard all of this stopped to figure out what to do next. Next, one by one, they started to get to the bug queen. One shouted that the energy would be his and he would show his power, the other that the one would get by. The others, that he found her first. Nonsense. Thinking he'd handle her faster than him, someone else to get rid of her. For this was their chance. And you could hear one of them asking to cover their mouths. That's how they went on the offensive. And she only smiled as she listened to all the chatter of the approaching humans. The queen of the evil bugs easily dealt with uninvited guests. 2 other contestants took up the fight with the queen. One of them said she was strong, but he will try to defeat her. Also, no, I couldn't. Qin Yu watched the whole beating. He saw that this boss was quite strong, but the guy couldn't understand why she was completely unresponsive to attacks. He examined her carefully, wondering if she didn't have a single weak spot. He slid his gaze over the bug queen's body and saw something. This must be the place. Qin Yu walked with one of his sisters between the other competitors and told her that he had a plan. He quietly told her his plan in her ear so no one else would hear. She excitedly said that the one would be in danger, but the guy had already started warming up and replied that the game was worth the candle. After that, he confidently walked forward where the other contestants were fighting with the queen. The dog girl nervously stood behind and Qin Yu walked forward towards the queen, saying that she was a dumbass. The queen used her claws to beat the participants who approached her on the head. Qin Yu with his spear was behind her and jumped to strike. The sisters shouted his name. He hurled his spear at the bug queen's back with tremendous force, screaming for her to die. He then commanded Xiao Xiao to go ahead, and the one in front started to hit her with a fire beam. His energy was palpably replenished from the hostility. As the bug queen felt pain, Xiao Xiao, one of the sister doggies, struck the ground. While doing so, she said for the pest queen to die. The force of the ground strike was directed just at the spot where Qin Yu's spear had hit. The pest queen screamed in pain, and her body was pierced by rays from the impact of the ground. Qin Yu carefully looked at the queen's back, and soon saw the very spot that was vulnerable. He gathered all his strength into his mighty fist, and struck his opponent hard in the back. Xiao Xiao said that Qin Yu was right in striking that place. After a while, Xiao Xiao heard some rustling, and she saw the bug queen coming up behind the guy, furious with her mouth open wide. The girl shouted for Qin Yu to start running, for she was still alive. He turned his head back, screaming in surprise at what? The guy's energy reserve increased a lot from the hostility. Xiao Xiao ran with her head turned back, and watched the picture of the bug queen catching Qin Yu by the head with her shepherd and lifting him into the air. Xiao Xiao called out to Qin Yu, who was in the bug queen's pasha. Something was happening there. Only his legs were visible, which were sticking out of her mouth. The queen became increasingly quieter in her demeanor and lowered her head slightly. Suddenly, a guy's big fist showed sharply through the queen's body. And after that, the entire Qin Yu also appeared. He was angry, shouting bloody things. Xiao Xiao quickly ran to him and told him not to be a fool and remember to control the amount of energy. But he didn't finish listening to what the girl was telling him and started falling unconscious on the ground near the body of the bug queen. As he fell, his body flew forward and he fell straight onto Xiao Xiao's chest. She asked what was wrong with him and said that he was scaring her. The second vice principal with a mustache and beard, who was in the arena next to Teacher Zhao, started shouting loudly, "Medics!" Rather, a medical team is needed in the arena, and pounded his fist on the table. The Yuli girl loudly shouted Qinyu's name while next to Yu Nui's mom. Qinyu began to read the information he received. There was about congratulating the host for successfully absorbing a level 5 demon soul, demon power obtained, demon armor obtained, and others. Qinyu woke up in a hospital room, all wrapped up in bandages, with a nurse standing next to him. He couldn't believe what was happening. The nurse excitedly asked if he was awake, how he was feeling, and for him to wait, and she would get the doctor. The nurse girl quickly ran off to fetch the doctor, and Qinyu raised his hand, trying to examine, and exclaimed that it was true. He received a message about his condition. There was information about who he was, and what his condition and abilities were. He raised his fists in joy because he thought he was good for nothing. But it turned out that he had the power of a demon after all. Next, he sat on his bed and began to wonder why he hadn't woken up earlier. Because maybe he needed to piss someone off again to heal himself. He decided that enough thinking, it was time to try out a new skill. His fists filled with power, and he was still in the middle of the bed. His face was covered in sweat. He was all tense. He concentrated all his strength into his fists and realized that this was the feeling. This was it. Suddenly, all of his bandages ripped at him. He began to feel his strength boiling. Suddenly, a claw appeared on his middle finger. Qinyu looked at this claw on his middle finger and only had a mute question. What on earth is this? He was frustrated. And the next second, he flared up. What the fuck was that thing? It only covers his finger after all. Why would he need it? And it's beyond him. At this time, a message about pumping demonic armor appeared. He rejoiced because luckily that wasn't all. Next thing you know, his entire palm was covered in armor. And then his entire arm was already covered in armor all the way up to his forearm. All the bandages on his arm were torn to shreds. Qinyu stood in the middle of the chamber with his left hand raised and admired the armor on it. Qinyu stood in the midst of his chamber and decided that he needed to try out the power of his attack. At the same time, a nurse and a doctor entered the room. She said that the guy who defeated the Pest Queen is awake. The doctor replied that he was fine, but that he couldn't take part in the competition. Something whizzed past the doctor and his hair flew up. The hem of the nurse's gown flew up as well. She tried to hold it back somehow. Both Qinyu and the doctor liked what they saw. The doctor examined the guy and said his body was in good condition, only a day old, and most of the internal damage had come back to normal. Also, the doctor said that one could be discharged after a month, but this didn't please Qinyu because he had to participate in the competition tomorrow. But the doctor was resolute. He said sternly, what a contest, that he shouldn't take it so seriously because he had shattered bones. The boy wondered, for there might be one way. He chose in the messages the self-healing of flesh and blood. At this time, the nurse was slowly bandaging his arm. He mentally apologized to the nurse. He needed to gather energy as quickly as possible to heal the injury after all. The guy with his free hand gripped the nurse's ass hard. She grabbed the spot where it hurt and began to scream angrily about what the man was doing. And Qinyu waved at her contentedly as the energy from the hostility was replenished again, and added that he was just needing his hand. Angry at the guy, the nurse said she'd get the nurse to finish up. And the boy thought he would get more energy from his aunt. He thought about it because apparently it wouldn't work that way. There were many beautiful nurses walking down the hallway with patients. He stomped his foot hard on the floor and swept like a whirlwind through the young nurse girls. They all had their gowns pulled up and could barely cover themselves, screaming at the top of their voices. Each of the girls radiated hostility, and that replenished his energy level. Qinyu voiced that he saw 7 black ones, 5 white ones, 2 pink ones, 8 with suspenders, and 1 with a size C. That was how he counted, even curling his fingers. The male patients really enjoyed the spectacle. They were all pleased. He added that he wasn't done yet. And a second later, they were standing naked, covering themselves, and the one holding someone's underwear in his hands. Here, he also increased the energy from the hostility. A few days later, the sparring arena was crowded. Yuli was by her mom's side and regretted that Qinyu had defeated the queen but was still unable to participate in the competition. But the announcer's voice made her hesitate. The following words sounded there, asking Qinyu from school number 3 and Lu Renjiang from school number 2 to come up to the arena. And she excitedly turned to her mom. After all, she heard Qinyu's name. She didn't just hear it. Isn't he seriously injured? How did he end up there? Qinyu walked into the arena, covered in bandages and wearing medical pajamas. Yuli started screaming again that it was really him. What's that dumbass up to? The host announces the 2 competitors in the arena. It's Qinyu and Lu Renjiang. The first goal to the center humming some cheerful tune. Lu Renjiang looked at the one with some fear and thought that the same one had come to fight fairly instead of scaring him. Qinyu approached to meet his opponent in the arena, still merrily humming a tune. Lu Renjiang was already on his head, for he kept his palm on the hilt of his sword. He was curious about what he was going to do. At this time, Qinyu bent down slightly and extended his hand to greet him, saying that he was glad to meet you. Lu Renjiang agreed that he shouldn't forget the rules of etiquette and released the handle of the weapon from his palm. He leaned forward, saying he was glad to meet you. Even thought how wonderful it was when a rival showed such respect for his enemy. But at this moment, something in Qin Yu as something clicked. His gaze changed and his eye lit up. His palm flew upward sharply and struck his opponent. Qin Yu started the fight with the words, "Get!" Soon his opponent lay head buried in the ground in the arena. The referee announced that Qin Yu had won, and he clucked 2 fingers. Yuna and Yuli simultaneously assured their faces with their hands and mumbled that they didn't know him. Over the next few match days, Qin Yu's shameless adaptability helped him defeat one opponent after another. One of the next opponents, he stabbed his finger in his eye. His energy increased once again. In the fight with the knight, he struck the one between his legs, once again gaining energy and victory. The next one was beaten so badly that he ran away from the one with tears in his eyes and his hands tied. The victory was once again Qin Yu's. Next, the announcer announced that Qin Yu would be fighting against Tang Lian. He said that it was her again. She stared at him intently from under the hood of her cape and told him that they had met again, and this time she would definitely get back at him. Tang Lian said that this time she would not let her tricks be used on him. She pulled out her 2 fire swords. He glared at her and began to tremble with fear. The little evil demon waved his fists with furious force. Qin Yu was trying to show some new techniques accompanied by Vinchun Qin Wen sounds. Qin Yu versus Tang Lian was announced again. They first looked at each other's eyes and then started fighting. Tang Lian started yelling at him, asking where his weapon was. Thoth smiled at her, replying that his body was his weapon. She called him a chatterbox, to which he replied that he was from a poor family, couldn't afford it. She stood in front of him, hiding her hands behind her back and telling him she wouldn't treat him like that. Tang Lian slipped a finger between her breasts, catching the edge of her armor. The host ran out to get a closer look at what was happening. Tilting her head down, she quietly mumbled that she had no clothes under her armor, so she would accept defeat. Qin Yu was a little nervous, saying, "Don't be. She just isn't dressed, it's fine. And no one is looking, and if she wants to, he will also undress." She gave me a hard, angry look, and she said in that case. She directed all her energy at him. But Qin Yu managed to intercept this flow with his armored hand. He tried to fend off Tang Lian's attack using his armor. She very quickly began to attack Qin Yu. He thought, fighting her off, that if they had crossed paths in the arena earlier, he would have definitely died. Tang Lian thought that she would easily deal with him by wearing armor, but she definitely didn't expect this. She grinned viciously, thinking that she didn't want to defame the family's honor, and she activated her level 3 combat weapons, namely electronic knives. Qin Yu didn't expect explosive attacks. Charges were coming off of her from everywhere, and the mantis knives were active. He couldn't stop her. One more attack like that, and he'd be out of arms. Qin Yu faintly thought that she was ready for a ploy on his part that time. Maybe it would work now. It was worth the risk. She worked her knives hard and realized that he would not last much longer. Her knives went through his body. Blood rushed from him. He even started coughing up blood. She smiled and said she had won. He looked at her from under his forehead and added that the victory, and finished the sentence behind him, and struck her with great force. He hit her again with renewed force in the stomach, so hard that the armor began to crack. As he threw more punches, the guy thought that this girl, fast, tenacious, talented, enthusiastic, you've caused him so much trouble, and her strength surely exceeds that of a rank 3 warrior. At this moment, she was already lying without armor, badly beaten on the ground. Thankfully, he had overpowered her and was now pulling her knives out of his body. Next, he started using self-healing. He threw her knives to the ground. They were covered in blood and fell with a clatter. Qin Yu looked back after hearing some sound. On the ground lay Xiao Xiao, his recent acquaintance. He called out to her, "Silly girl." Qin Yu bent down beside her, lifting her slightly. He asked her if she had decided to change her breed, as it was not suitable for her. He thought about it, with 32 fractures all over her body. There was hardly anyone inferior to her in strength who could do such a thing to her. The injured Xiao Xiao slightly opened her mouth and quietly whispered, "Qin Yu, be careful, space martial arts." He looked at her in bewilderment. The same martial art that is recognized as the hardest to learn in Western culture. He heard that Wang Jie was the winner, so he asked him what he was doing. Qin Yu lifted the girl up, escaping the opponent's strike. Wang Jie jumped onto the ground so that the ground beneath him separated slightly, and the guy and girl fell down. Qin Yu turned menacingly to his rival, asking him if he knew the rules of behavior. Wang Jie, a 3rd-level warrior, raised his hands to the top and smilingly said calmly that he was only saying hello. The frustrated Qin Yu thought that he didn't give a shit about the jerk. He felt very sorry for his friend who had been beaten so badly by Wang Jie. And then Wang Jie added gloatingly, so he shouldn't worry after all, this was only a welcoming ceremony. He continued that the next time they met again, they would settle all matters. Xiao Qiao was lying on the grass with her opponent standing on different sides of her. The medics ran into the arena, who shouted, "Hurry up, here is an injured person, no two," seeing Qin Yu. and he asked the opponent that he came for him, and she was injured for nothing. The medics carried Xiao Xiao away on a stretcher, and Qin Yu said, "Thank you, silly girl, you can rest with peace of mind." He appreciates what she did for him, but she shouted loudly that she was not dying yet. The announcer reappeared and said that the exciting moment was coming, and after all these battles, it would be known who made it to the top 6. There are fights to the death ahead, and they will find out who will be the champion. Next, he asked to look at his opponent on the scoreboard. On this scoreboard, there was an inscription that Wang Jie would be fighting against Qin Yu. Qin Yu, seeing this, thought that he should prepare himself. That same day, before the fight between Qin Yu and Wang Jie started, the latter stood with his sword behind his back and nervously waited for his opponent, all the while saying, "Where is this Qin Yu going? Well, where is he going?" An exclamation of "Here he is, here he is," could be heard on the podium. It was Yu Li shouting joyfully, pointing her finger at him. She was with Yu Noi's mom, Xiao Xiao, Zhao's teacher. Qin Yu cheerfully entered the arena, wearing some sort of costume with strange things filled with spices hanging all over it. It could be heard that everyone was wondering what he was wearing. Qin Yu jumped up and the surroundings once again erupted. "Look what he's wearing! What the hell is this? What kind of circus is he putting on?" He landed just in front of Wen Jie, who asked if he was ready to admit defeat. Qin Yu put his palm forward and smiled, saying that whatever he had planned, it was none of his business. The fight had begun. They tried to greet each other. Wen Jie laughed loudly, saying that he wanted to see what a member of the Great Horned Family could do, and drew his sword forward. Qin Yu interrogated the Horned Family if he had seen himself in the mirror. After all, he was a devil. Wen Jie was already standing behind him and swinging his sword, and Qin Yu turned his head at him to see what he was doing. He barely touched his shoulder with his fiery great sword. Wen Jie realized what it was. It was demonic armor. It was a great ability. It really wasn't easy to obtain such a skill, but it wouldn't save him. When Qin Yu turned around, something flew at him, fiery. He recognized it and shouted out a sword. Next, he fended off the frequent attacks of that frenzied sword. Wen Jie shouted that he had lost. His sword was cradled by the chain he was unwinding. Qin Yu tried again and again to repel the attacks of this sword that appeared from different directions time and time again. But then the armor expired and he missed the blow and flew backwards. Wen Jie happily said that his end had come. He put his sword on his shoulder and crouched down, pointing his finger down. Qin Yu, gathering his strength, raised his knee and replied so that he would not jump to conclusions. He smiled and pointed a finger upward, telling him to look up. Wen Jie couldn't understand anything about it. Suddenly, the condiment containers that were on Qin Yu's suit started falling and exploding on him. As they exploded, they splattered the contents on Wen Jie's face and body. Qin Yu threw a punch with the words, "Here's one for you." Angry Wang Jie steeled himself and said that originally, he wanted to just let him go. And further raising his hands up, standing in a belligerent posture, he shouted that the man himself had decided to die. Qin Yu was covered in a pile of black smoke. He could barely be seen. Xiao Xiao told Yu Li that it was a trap. Previously, he had used this technique to deprive her of her ability to control the space around her. That was how he had defeated her. It was hard to breathe in that black fog. Qin Yu called his opponent a coward, but he saw a large shadow from his horns. Wang Jie, a third-level warrior of the Demon King clan, became completely unrecognizable and terrifying. He shouted for Qin Yu to shudder in terror, and that he would do whatever he said. But Qin Yu didn't waste any time punching the one in the face, to which the demon replied that he would pay. Qin Yu rubbed his arm after the blow. It was riddled with pain, and asked the one in the video, "He's a horse or something." The enraged Wang Jie, in the form of a demon, yelled loudly and shouted that he would pay. Qin Yu began to spin the black vortex around him. Teacher Zhao noticed that this student's capabilities were unique. Where did he come from? Yu Na discreetly replied to her that it was possible. But in any case, the opponent's abilities greatly exceeded Qin Yu's. Qin Yu stood in the middle of the arena in black smoke, ready to attack his opponent. But he couldn't figure out where he was now in this black Imla. Suddenly a sharp pain pierced his back. The man struck him from behind. He tried to reach for the one to hit, but couldn't catch it. And Wang Jie towered over him and said, "That silly horned devil. He thinks he's the only one so special." Just then, Qin Yu began to run away from him to the side. Stopping, he asked if he was also from the royal clan. And the answer I got was, naturally. Wen Jie turned out to be the executioner of the royal clan. Qin Yu was confused. Next, Qin Yu had a huge sword flying rapidly. But Qin Yu stopped him, taking his demonic armored mid-level arm with his demonic armor. But his opponent didn't calm down, shouting that it was impossible. The demon clan doesn't have such defensive skills. He's not a demon. Who is he really? Qin Yu angrily replied his daddy, and received an increase in energy from his opponent's hostility. He coughed as he looked at Qin Yu, and his hostility grew once again while Qin Yu increased his energy points. Qin Yu struck Wang Jie again with his armored hand. Qin Yu continued to taunt his opponent, saying to him an executioner, though Voldemort, and watched as his opponent's hostility grew and his energy increased. The guy thought that no matter who Wang Jie was, he wouldn't be able to resist against his skills. Wang Jie swung his huge sword and shouted that the winner would still be him, and wished for the one-horned demon to die. Qin Yu smiled and looked slyly to the side. Yuli began to feel nervous as to why the sound had disappeared. Xiao Xiao also looked anxiously at the arena, unable to see anything clearly. Everything was twirling and spinning in a black and green whirlwind. Yuli called out to Qin Yu. Scattered all around in the middle stood Qin Yu with a sword in his hand. The opponent's horn lay severed on the ground. The opponent himself was on his knees with a sword at his throat. Xiao Xiao shouted in surprise that he had won. Teacher Zhao covered her mouth with her hands and mumbled, "What the hell? What's even going on?" Qin Yu stood smiling while his opponent was with his sword on the ground. Wang Jie swung his sword with the words, "Die fucking demon." Qin Yu stood there wondering how to defeat him. Qin Yu forcefully repelled the sword attack. Wang Jie couldn't believe it, for he thought it was impossible. And in the next second, Qin Yu forcefully kicked his opponent between his legs. He was in a lot of pain. The opponent was kneeling. Qin Yu had his sword in Qin Yu. The one asked how he knew where he was. Qin Yu started attacking the man with his own sword, and replied that he had taken the condiments for a reason. Next, Qin Yu called him a legless chromium demon. He swung and cut off his horn. He took his horn in his hands and began to regret it. It was his horn, the pride of the clan. With his horn in hand, he stood up and began shouting furiously. The hostility was off the charts, increasing energy by 2,000. Present tense. Akelia, a level 8 Sheep Knight boss warrior, appeared in the arena. She swung her swords and told Qin Yu to take a step backwards and let the rest of it slip to her. With sword in hand, he said it was easy. With a dark whirlwind, Qin Yu was thrown aside from his opponent. The one immediately began to get nervous about who had turned off the lights. A hoof hit the ground hard. Following him, a huge giant with 2 large horns and a sword on his shoulders became visible. Akelia grabbed Qin Yu and shouted out, "Father." She called him silly, and he remembered that it was Wu Chao. Akelia threw Qin Yu away from her and started yelling about how didn't she tell them to retreat. She raised her weapon at that huge demon and discovered that it was a level 9 sword demon. The little demon in front of him begged for forgiveness, for he wanted to get into this world and slaughter them all. The little demon didn't think that this misunderstanding could overpower him. It was Qin Yu who was behind Akelia. She replied that he was a fool and be damned. Qin Yu only said that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say. The big demon looked at Qin Yu and asked if the horned demon's son was the same. He stood pointing a finger at him, and the little demon in his hand squeaked that he should piss off his father, and he would be a corpse. The big demon said that Qin Yu should submit, and he would grant him the priceless right to surrender voluntarily. Yu Li in the arena along with Yunoi's mom were very nervous as they watched what was happening. At some point, Yuna jumped up from her seat and stared intently at the arena. Wang Jie thought that his father had invited this scumbag. He approved of him, but after all, he didn't even approve of him. Akelia turned to Qin Yu. They are trying to poach him there. But the man spread his hands apart and said that it wouldn't work. He didn't agree. Akelia raised her weapon and asked the demon if he had heard. She started swinging her weapon, saying that people thought he was too ugly, let him go back to his demon world and stop raping their eyes with his looks. Akelia tried to attack the unperturbed huge devil. She attacked again and again, chanting for him. In a puff of smoke, Qin Yu watched her from the side. A huge devil with a huge sword was telling Akelia that she would regret it. The little devil Wang Jie, who was in his father's hand, was showing Qin Yu a middle finger. Qin Yu's energy from hostility increased once again. His hatred could be compared to Auntie's. Suddenly the fire in the arena went out and the devil was gone. Only Qin Yu and Akelia stood looking at where the devil had just been. Yu Li, sitting on the podium, told her mom that although Qin Yu wasn't the most obedient child, but they should treat him better when they got home. Yunu wondered if demons could really change. Qin Yu walked up to the judge and asked why he still hadn't declared him the winner. Had he decided to fool around in the workplace? Akelia said that it wasn't worth worrying about, because if a level 9 demon managed to get into the arena, then the place wasn't safe anymore. We need to get out of there. Qin Yu interrogated her with what? He was surprised and completely confused. Specialized guards had already appeared around the arena. They were armed and guarding the perimeter. Qin Yu was upset, thinking that he had the impression that they didn't want him to win, and so they suspended the competition. Xiao Xiao walked up to him and said that they had always been like this. He was surprised to see them, but interjected that they were also leaving. The dog girls were together. One of them said sure, but Big Sister insisted that they should thank him before leaving. Xiao Xiao told him thank you, and whatever he says, he is good at heart. Qin Yu smiled at them, telling them to stop talking like they wanted to sell him something. Stop thanking him. Xiao Xiao was excited and was slightly covered in cold sweat from this. She looked intently into his eyes and said matter-of-factly, Yi Xiao Xiao ran up to Qin Yu and hugged him tightly. Xiao Xiao entered the bus to leave the arena. Standing behind her was Qin Yu. She told him that they would see each other again. He looked after the departing bus and wondered if he had her. Qin Yu looked at his hand and finished his thought with the word rounded. The bus drove leisurely down the road, taking everyone out of the arena. Qin Yu just stared out the bus window at the trees in the road. He remembered the devil's words that he would regret it, and what that meant. He'd set a trap for him. Suddenly the bus shook, and the passengers were tossed from side to side. Qin Yu opened the window of the bus and looked outside to see the reason for such an incident. A fiery fox head looked at him. Qin Yu wondered if this was the last trump card. The guards ordered driver Jax to take the children to the nearest shelter. Hurry up! The one replied briefly understood and looked to the road for a quicker drive to safety. Qin Yu heard a message for everyone to get ready for battle. They sent a distress signal from the communicator. We need to hold out until the army comes to help. The bus was traveling fast, looping slightly, and the two firefoxes were advancing behind it. The bus pulled into a shelter. There was an immediate message that they had arrived at a safe place. Everyone was asked to remain calm. The guard spoke a message, and the terrified passengers listened. The passengers were then escorted out of the bus cabin. The driver told the 4 guards to consist near the door to the hideout. He also offered to send someone for help, for when the enemy found them, the steel gate would not hold him. One of the guards stopped when he saw someone's palm in front of him. Qin Yu stopped the guard, saying that he had to settle a matter with the driver. The driver stood behind the 2 guards, asked if he was Qin Yu, and after that, he said that all matters would be dealt with when they solved the current problem. The guard put his hand on Qin Yu's shoulder and asked him to step aside, but Qin Yu stood with his arms spread apart. The guard tried to pass but couldn't, then said that one was so strong. Qin Yu told the guard that his question was an order of magnitude more important. The driver asked what he wanted. Suddenly he started screaming and spitting blood. Qin Yu threw a punch and asked why he hated him so much. The teacher asked what. His eyes even turned red. Qin Yu asked the question again. Why would a person who was seeing him for the first time feel such hatred towards him? Hostility, the energy once again increased. The guards pointed a gun at him. Qin Yu was ordered to let him go or else they would shoot. Something was happening to the driver, or rather to his body. All around, a black fiery haze of fire could be seen emanating from the driver. The guard was covered in a cold sweat of fear. The guards and Qin Yu looked at the place where the driver was, and there he was no longer there, only some monster. The guard said that it was a mirage of some sort. The guards and Qin Yu stood in front of the monster's body. The guard said that it was a mirage with superior disguise skills. At what point did he, and didn't finish the sentence. The guard thanked Qin Yu for helping him in his time of need. The one replied with a smile that was not worth a thank you. Suddenly, Qin Yu's arm was covered in armor and gathered energy together. He shot his power past the other passengers who got off the bus. Qin Yu landed after a jump, and behind him, 3 small monsters lay slain. The guard only opened his mouth to say this. Qin Yu's hand became normal again, and the guard was curious as to how he knew. Qin Yu replied that it was obvious. The system opened hateful windows for him time and time again. Of everyone there, only he was the only one who could hate him so much. The guard marveled that the current generation had a great future. Qin Yu started to scream loudly, devil, startled. The guard was also together with Qin Yu was frightened and screamed like hell. They started to run quickly. Qin Yu shouted that Jerk had originally planned to bring them there. There must be an ambush. Suddenly they saw the dragon of the realm of the dead, the kid. He had already dealt with the 3 passengers. They were dead. Qin Yu stared intently and fearfully shouted out, "Damn it, it's a dragon!" The dragon heard Qin Yu's scream and even let go of the dead body from his mouth, starting to look at the guy. The dragon opened its mouth and started breathing fire, so Qin Yu had to jump and run away from the fire. The fire the dragon was breathing began to smash the walls of the shelter to pieces. Qin Yu stopped to see what was going on and could only whisper what the... Suddenly a guard shouted for Qin Yu to be careful. There was a dragon looking at him up close, and the guy seeing it didn't hold back, saying, "Holy fuck, that's a behemoth." It was Dragon Kid scrutinizing the guy with all his eyes, and Qin Yu only had time to read the messages. Hostility. Energy increased by... He tried to run away, but the dragon caught up with him and breathed fire on him. Qin Yu shouted at him that he was wrong and that the dragon was not a giant at all. The boy ran fast, but the dragon kept up with him, trying to roast him. Quite unexpectedly, Qin Yu had a new idea. He smiled. The dragon looked forward with his eyes uncomprehendingly. A bus passed by in front of the dragon. Naturally, the dragon accelerated and leaped at him. Qin Yu stood there, basking in the glory, everyone praising him, and he said thanking the people around him. Hostility. Energy increased. These were the kind of messages Qin Yu received from the dragon. When the bus passed, the dragon had already jumped and couldn't stop, and thus stuck its face into the stone wall. Chin-Yu contentedly thought to himself, what a great opportunity. Chin-Yu thought that the devil was helping him with his own hands, and Dragon Kid was also thinking about what this kid was doing. After all, he's still just a kid. The dragon lay down and barely growled. Chin-Yu said to trumpet the victory fanfare, for it was coming his way. Chin-Yu said he saw him and his heart froze for a second, and laughed. The guy was destroying the dragon with the words that his end would come soon. He would straighten it out. And he, having increased the energy from the dragon's hostility. The guards were out of their minds at what was happening. They said that the one didn't even spare the female, the other that he couldn't realize what was happening, but he was shocked by it. Suddenly the walkie-talkie started talking. Unit 7, Unit 7. Convoy attacked in the 4th block of Dog City. They can't send anyone to help. Waiting for reinforcements. Waiting for reinforcements. Chin-Yu got excited when he heard about the Dog City. There are sisters there, aren't there? The guard was on the radio, asking the hell out of me what the hell happened out there. Chin-Yu asked the one if this was the guard's walkie-talkie. He replied that it was, and that there was a need for backup in the Dog City. The guy quickly snatched the walkie-talkie out of that guard's hands. The guard shouted, trying to get his point across. He meant that he had to protect his classmates, and he had to go to the rescue. Where'd he go? There were 2 people talking in cell block 4. Why the boss won't let them kill anyone? Not even the ones who put him underground. The girl dressed in purple continued, what are they doing here then? The girl dressed in green replied that she had heard that it was all about them having someone of their own. So they need hostages to negotiate too. The first demon girl interjected. And who was the hostage? The same guy who was able to improve his skills and control other demons. The second one, angry, replied that she told him not to talk about it on the street. The demon girl was talking about how the days have been dragging so much lately, wishing she could eat a couple of orcs. And at this time, Chin-Yu procures a demon shoe, falls on her right on her chest. Chin-Yu tries to catch her so that she doesn't fall down and interrogated if she is all right. The demon girl glared at him and thought that one was handsome. The green-clad girl tried to restrain her partner and asked him what squad he was from and how he got there. Chin-Yu was not confused. He smiled and said from the Demon King's convoy. What's going on here? His Majesty personally sent him there for this. A girl with purple clothes and hair shouted that it was every man for himself. The important thing was that he wasn't hurt. The other one was looking at the dragon scales. She wondered why there was blood. The girl with purple hair was hugging the boy and calling him to come with her. They were moving out towards the other squad, taking him with them. He thought about how strong her pecs were. The 2 walked forward talking. She suggested calling her sis, and that he should be an obedient boy. And he laughed, calling her sis, and so cute. And there was one friend of this girl left behind, who was getting angry and yelling to wait for her. He was walking with a girl with her angry friend trailing behind, and he was thinking about stupid dogs. Daddy's here. Meanwhile, he was looking around. There was a car in one of the hangars and several large cages in front of it. The girl dogs were all in the cage together. The big sister was reassuring the little one that everything was fine and they would soon be rescued. Suddenly they heard the phrase, "You puppies here." Xiao Xiao. Big sister recognized him, for it was Chin-Yu. She looked at the guy. He was all kissed up as he had a woman's lipstick all over his face. It made her very angry. She asked Chin-Yu if he was really with those devils. And the girl with purple hair stood behind Chin-Yu and asked the man that he had tracked down his girlfriend. Xiao Xiao boiled up, grasped the bars, and angrily asked what he had blabbed to her. He sharply slipped his hand between the bars and covered her mouth with the palm of his hand. She was frightened. He whispered to her that that's it, stop talking, it's not about him. He wasn't the one to help them. The demon girl took him under the arm, said sure. They're bitches, not his level. He turned his back to the cage and said, "Thank you, sis." She replied that it was nothing, shouldn't they rely on each other. The older sister nearly threw up from her acquaintance with her new friend. The younger dog girl was banging on the bars and yelling who she called a bitch. Xiao Xiao tried to say something, sister, but after all, they really are. When he was covering Xiao Xiao's mouth, he threw her earpiece down there. Now she took it out and said that did Chin-Yu really sneak in just for them? She put in her earpiece and heard the 3rd and 4th squad coming in from the left side. The 5th and 6th squad staying at the main entrance. 2nd squad is moving on. There's an extra channel. Someone's listening. She smiled and replied that the high school team was on the phone. She repeated again that the high school team was on the phone. It turns out Chin-Yu hid his true identity and smuggled in an earpiece. The city was on fire. The high-rise buildings that stood among the green trees were burning. Bone Demon, a level 6 warrior, spoke at a gathering of the same, saying that they would not wait for their opponents to go on the offensive. He's decided to form a task force to bring the demon back here. Whoever wants to join. And behind him stood the warden, a level 4 warrior. Chin Yu pondered for a moment. He didn't have to do this. But what if, let them screw up at the last minute? Surely he could earn a bunch of energy points. Chin Yu slowly raised his hand upwards. Behind him, the Scythe of Death, a level 3 warrior, raised his hand. Next, the Fire Demon, a level 4 warrior, also raised his hand. Armored Demon, a level 4 warrior, also raised his hand. Then a hand was raised at the Bone Demon, a level 4 warrior, and the man in charge told them fine. They had made the right choice. He asked them to welcome the heroes. Everyone who raised their hand, along with Chin Yu, walked towards the main one from their seats. The Bone Demon laid a hand on one of the consenting men's shoulder and said they would be rewarded upon their return. Chin Yu noted that there were connected dots standing everywhere. "All right, hit the road," the Bone Demon was telling them. "There are a huge number of coordinates, each of which is associated with a demon. None of them will take you directly to him. In any case, the choice of coordinates is up to them. And try to get it back before the enemy does anything." Good luck. Chin Yu thought about what he had heard. The deployment of the orcs was complete. Meanwhile, Chin Yu fell down beside them. The orcs stood with their spears, and in front of them, Chin Yu lay with his head slightly raised. He was looking forward, and blurted the hell out. The chief pointed his finger at the demons and ordered them to be caught. They were on the offensive against the demons. One of them said that finally, he was hungry for battle. While the demons were gathering, Chin Yu quickly ran off in the other direction away from everyone. The demons spoke among themselves that they could not fall foul of it. The other answered that was true. And demons will never be slaves. Someone shouted, "Rabs for crying out loud," just as the spear hit him. The demons were attacked from a variety of weapons. The head demon was screaming to get their asses kicked. Hearing such a thing, Chin Yu realized that only idiots would sign up for such a thing and ran away from them. He ran screaming, "Hurry up, we have to get out of there." He quickly ran to some house. I opened the door quietly, went inside quickly. Chin Yu stood outside the door and looked through the crack of the uncovered doors while hiding. He heard someone shouting for them to find him. He stood there pondering. If he reveals himself, he won't be able to escape. There was no one there to help him. Chin Yu heard something and thought for a moment. Someone touched his horn. He called out loudly who was here. In front of him stood an all-black girl with a gag in her mouth. He looked over and exclaimed, "Ah, that's who, don't panic. He's not going to do anything to her. And he's on his way out." The girl fell to the ground. Chin Yu told her to be quieter, but she only made a sound. Her eyes were filled with tears. He crouched down beside her, asking if she wanted to say anything. Chin Yu tapped her forehead with his bent palm, and said that he had no intention of listening. The guy stood in front of the chained girl and said he preferred silence. The next sentence came to him about checking if their prisoner was still alive. Chin Yu grumbled. He looked around in panic. He had to hide, but there was nowhere to hide. The muzzle of some kind of weapon appeared in the ajar door. They went inside, checked on the girl, and said that everything was fine. She was here. The other one sighed and said thank you. One said that he thought the best way was to ask the knights to look after her, but on the other hand, everything was pretty safe there, so it was a no-brainer. Another said that unlike them, the knights were more respected by the population. Chin Yu was on the ceiling and realized that he shouldn't get involved, because he wouldn't earn any points, but Aunt Yuna might as well kill him accidentally. The other continued to say that the mayor and his cronies had long disliked them, so they wouldn't ask for help. Chin Yu was barely holding on and wouldn't be able to hold on for so long anymore. And underneath, the conversation continued, that he knew there was no point in thinking about such a thing, but they would work on how to regain respect. These two spoke next. The mayor of the city changes every 3 years, so the reputation of the troops is his last concern, especially since knights are a hereditary profession. The other answered him that he'd trust the knights more than a bunch of civilians anyway. Chin Yu realized that his matters had become quite bad, just a little more and he would fall. The two men with guns were walking through the house. One asked the other to check the room. Chin Yu jumped from the ceiling to the ground at this time. He stood beside the girl and thought, damn, how the hell is he supposed to hide? He looked at the girl who had opened her eye, and I couldn't help but put my hand on her breast, thinking how big she was. He sat on her stomach on top of her. She was asked to be quiet, or she didn't understand human language. Chin Yu thought that he was an idiot. Isn't he being too noisy? The door opened abruptly, those two piling in and shouting what the sounds were. They saw the guy was near the harnessed girl and holding her breasts. A moment later, he was behind the two of them, saying he was asking for forgiveness. And then with tremendous force, he pushed their foreheads against each other. The two of them fell to the ground in front of Chin Yu, only managing to make a single sound. The girl was still crouched with a gag in her mouth, looking at him fearfully. The guy moved closer to her, asking if she had anything to say. She mumbled. He pulled the gag from her mouth, asking what her last word would be. And the girl started saying she was a demon with boiling blood. Chin Yu queried if it was true that she had boiling blood. She said yes, and that is why he must save her. He didn't believe her, asked how she would prove it. What kind of evidence? She replied that if those two could testify, they knew who she was. He seriously asked if there was physical evidence. She confirmed that there was too. Demons with this feature have V-shaped horns. Chin Yu could understand her. She had been captured anyway, so what good was she? The girl replied that they were just lucky. If the one wanted to, they could work together. In the past, demons like him weren't worthy of her slippers. He started choking her by the throat. She was scared. The boy grinned, saying that she had piqued his curiosity. Did she know that demons gained their abilities by eating other demons? He kept squeezing her neck, and she screamed at what he was doing. Let go now. He said it was one way to learn new skills. The guy was choking the girl. She was screaming, let go and save her. Chin Yu turned his head at the sound. He was asked what this horned demon was doing. Suddenly, other demons appeared in the room, ordering her to let go. The demons were trying to catch up with Chin Yu. One of them said it was valuable booty. He couldn't give it up. Chin Yu walked closer to the girl, looking into the demon's eyes. Chin Yu smiled slyly at the demon and said that he wanted to fix the girl's necklace, for it had loosened. The demon lifted the girl in the air, telling the guy that he had done well. The demon was carrying the girl in his arms, the others following behind him. The one was telling them to keep going as the warlock was about to open the portal. The boy realized that he just wanted to kill him. The bony demon was coming out of the door of the room. They tried to catch him in the crosshairs. He was now clearly visible in the scope as he walked forward a bit. The next second, a gunshot rang out, the bloody bony demon falling to the floor. The other demons watched in horror as their leader was killed. The demon girl was in one of their arms. They were furious at that moment. Chin Yu thought that it didn't take long for the reaction to kill the bony demon. From the end of the corridor towards the demon with the girl in his arms, the other demons behind with Chin Yu, the military men ran towards him, pointing their weapons, shouting, "Don't let them get away." The demons looked intently at the approaching humans. One of them shouted forward and began to put up a fight. While this demon was distracting the military, behind his back the others were already running away, holding the demon girl in their arms. Chin Yu looked around and exhaled loudly in relief, but the demon ordered him to be faster. The guy asked the one with the girl to slow down, letting him pass in front. But suddenly he saw something new that he didn't expect. Some force was appearing in front of him. Something was happening. He stopped abruptly, silently staring forward at what he had seen earlier. The demon was getting angry, because he was talking to him and he wasn't responding. They saw the shape-shifting elephants that immediately attacked the demon and killed it instantly. The girl was falling from his arms as the elephant werewolves killed the demon that carried her. Chin Yu caught her, saying that this was what he called professionalism. The elephants continued to fight with the other demons behind Chin Yu, walking with the girl in his arms. He walked over to the portal and put the girl inside. Someone was yelling, "Help me." It was one of the demons who said his uncle was running the operation. His uncle. He's going to ask for a generous reward. Chin Yu walked closer to the screaming demon on the ground and looked at the one. Then he lifted his leg high above the skeleton demon's head and kicked it with force, shattering all of its bones to pieces. The guy smiled and said he'd ask his uncle to pick out a nicer coffin. The military showed up at the end of the hallway again and saw him. They shouted that here he was and don't let him get away. Chin Yu began to realize that it was getting too dangerous, and it was time for him to get the hell out of there. The picture shows a high-rise building near a park, with the sun shining brightly. The boy walked forward from the portal as his path was blocked by several bone demons. One addressed him, calling him the Horned Devil. He wondered where his nephew was, where he was. Chin Yu began to cry, saying he died in battle. He died without making a sound, as befits a hero. The demon raised his hands in fury, asking if it was true. Chin Yu squinted his eyes, and the answer, of course. It's a joke, and he laughed. This guy had a miserable existence. His leg was chopped off to begin with, and before he died, he begged for help. Chin Yu covered his eyes with his hand, saying that unfortunately he could not help him. The dead man's uncle asked, "That's how it is." The guy asked where. The girl in the arms of one of those bony ones said, "Where is she?" The one holding her answered, "Miss, you're safe. We're in our headquarters." The other one was worried too, asked if she was awake and how she was feeling. She sat holding her head and said who is the hero that saved her, she will reward him generously. Chin Yu looked out from behind the bony ones, waved his hand, and replied that it was him. She looked up at him in horror, grabbing her neck, and he only laughed. She started screaming very loudly. The scream was so strong that the demons plugged their ears to keep from going deaf. Chin Yu walked up to the screaming girl, hitting her so that she fell down, and the screaming finally stopped. Chin Yu was called a horned demon and asked what he was doing. He was thinking seriously about something. Suddenly, bats appeared. They reported that the humans had activated the teleporter and they were now teleporting to them. The boss asked how they knew where they were. The demons began to panic. You could hear them saying that they had released all their prisoners. Another shouted that it could not be. A third, what are they going to do now? One more might kill them all. And Qin Yu thought that the rescue team seemed to have arrived. The command to retreat and immediately go to another headquarters was heard. Qin Yu, the Horned Devil, was ordered to grab her, and he heads for her. Qin Yu replied to the boss that everything would be done to the best of his ability, and he himself thought that now that the battle had reached its peak, there was no time to waste. One must act according to the plan. They all ran swiftly, with Qin Yu still carrying the demon girl on his shoulder. He pointed his hand toward the entrance to the room and shouted in there, but he himself began to accelerate sharply to run faster. He and the girl on his shoulder ran faster than anyone else, and now he was already running up to the door of the room. He ran inside and yanked the door shut. The boss took great umbrage, saying, "Hey, horny." He stopped at the entrance, but the doors forcefully closed added to this boss's sides and crushed his skull. Running inside with the demon girl on his shoulder, Qin Yu was greatly surprised to see the head demon and mumbled this. It was that head demon Berserk. The one asked Qin Yu that he just took the door in front of his face and closed it. Qin Yu couldn't understand what he was talking about. What did he care? Qin Yu started to lower the demon girl to the ground from his shoulder. He thought that the transition probability was not high, otherwise the orcs would have been there too. He set the girl on the ground and asked that their mission to save her was true. The demon Berserk asked the guy to give it to him, and his reward will be well deserved. But the fellow replied that he was accustomed to be primarily a villain, not a gentleman, so that if they did not agree about the price, he smiled and pressed her so that she arched, and he went on to say that he would keep her and enjoy her himself. Demon Berserk offered to give him the essence of a high-level demon, which would increase the durability of his demonic armor. Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. Essence interrogated that demon. The demon continued to bargain, or another entity that would increase the healing itself. Would he be satisfied with that? The guy was still holding the girl in his arms and thought he didn't like the arrogant tone of his and what Circa was saying. Barring his opponent's high status, what he was offering could very well be some cheap stuff. All he could think was that he was confused. And the girl opened her eye. She screamed, "No, too much." He was interested in what the self-defense and self-repair abilities were. The girl started oohing and ahhing, and the demon had bloody snot running down his throat. The guy couldn't make up his mind, but who knows? He looked confidently at the Berserk demon and said he had made his decision. His hand squeezed the girl's breast with force. Suddenly, she started to spin a little. Toth asked her what was wrong. The demon girl nestled her head against his shoulder and said he wasn't bad. She kissed the guy, and the demon coughed to remind her of its existence. Demon Berserk was wiping his bloody nose, and the girl stood hugging the guy. The demon wondered what the man had chosen. Qin Yu said that he wanted everything. If that person wanted him to give her back, then let him give everything. Demon Berserk lowered his head, thinking about what the boy had said. Qin Yu grasped the sword with words to weigh what is more important to you, and brought the sword up to the girl's chest, and the girl said the demon was capable of doing it himself. The demon looked at them in silence, thought about the proposal. Next, the demon Berserk raised his hand and said, "Okay, he agrees." Qin Yu stretched out one hand to gain strength while the other hand held the girl. The demon held out his hand with the words, "Give it back." Qin Yu smiled and said that he had one more requirement in him. The demon flared up, shouting out that he wasn't done yet. Demon Berserk shouted that the Horned One was taking on too much. Qin Yu held the girl's waist with one hand while the other held the power he had received. The second thing he asked was to tell her how to use it all. The demon asked the one who didn't know how to absorb essences. The girl turned to the boy and whispered that she would teach him. Qin Yu looked into her eyes, asking if she would teach him. The girl replied that any demon who grew up in purgatory would know how to do it. Her fingers guided her breasts as she continued that devouring each other's flesh and essence was the ability of demons. She said that once an opportunity comes along, you should seize it, and also, if you add her bodily fluid, the fusion will go faster. And she wanted to lick him with her tongue. She leaned toward him, but Qin Yu slapped her, turning her away from him. She stood there, tucked into something, and whispered that this was the first time she'd ever played a game like this. And then what happened? He said to stand like this. He thought about what was happening, and shoved the ball with force into his mouth, chewing. Got a message from the system. Self-healing blood and flesh medium. Armor power medium. He was happy to have such a great thing. Qin Yu asked the demon if he still had such a thing. The one thought that ordinary demons took 3 months to digest a demonic essence. How did he manage to absorb it so easily? And the guy got increased energy from the demon's envy. Demon Berserk said he was afraid he'd die by consuming another one. The system was giving out hate messages. The energy from this only made Qin Yu's energy rise. Maybe he was offended that the one had made him hate him. He hesitated. No, the system tells him it's someone behind him. There is someone behind him. Qin Yu started to cover himself in armor, but some of the sharp points still plagued him. The girl squealed. Chin Yu was lying on the floor in blood. She lowered herself to the floor beside him and asked how he was. But the armor had come too late and now it would take time to recover. One of the demons appeared above her, said that was it. And the girl shouted fearfully that it was him. And standing up, she answered menacingly that he should not touch her servant. The latter replied that the lad should not have touched his tribesman. And now, he raised his sword upward and continued that he would pay for his rudeness. The girl glared at him with anger, spreading her arms out to the sides as if to protect him. Demon Berserk jumped into the fray, saying that she was a scarce resource. You can't dispose of her at will. But the attacker didn't care about the girl. He grabbed her hand, telling her that she would go with him. The girl screamed that she didn't want to. She broke free and ran towards Chin Yu, shouting the word guy. She bites down on her finger and turns to him. She knows she doesn't like him, but it was always emotion that drove the blood-boiling demons. She leaned toward him, took his head in both hands, and began to move closer. He looked at her and couldn't understand what she was going to do. Leaning toward him, she touched her lips to his. They kissed.